And that was kind of labeled generically a reserve study that we'll go out with. It's not really a reserve study because a typical reserve study is done by a homeowners association, for example, to determine how much you should set aside out of current assessments in order to cover ordinary repair and maintenance cost as well as replacement costs. You look at the life of the buildings. But this will actually give us hard data, up-to-date data on kind of the current value of all our assets. Again, there aren't that many, as well as replacement cost associated with that. I think probably through the audit committee, we maybe need to determine how best to go through, look at a review our current insurance coverage for all our assets. And I haven't taken a look at our bridge agreement. Just want to make sure, and I don't know if that's something that could be assigned to the audit committee or not, or we can just do that separately. And we've had some discussion, and maybe we can update that. We had a little bit on yesterday in the context of the MOU with KICA that has expired regarding storm cleanup costs. So that's all of the first topic area, and I don't know if there's anything that people want to follow up on or not.
Well, the only thing I wanted to follow up on, you mentioned yesterday something I was not aware of. You said we have an insurance policy for the bridge replacement. That part I was not aware of. I knew we had a line item. We had a line item in, for the cost to repair it. I wasn't aware it was full replacement.
Correct. We have insurance policy for the bridge. The premium is rather high. It's about $70,000, but it's a full replacement cost, which at.
Okay, so the follow-up on that is, aside from the replacement, is that insurance policy also including the temporary bridge that we have to bring in?
Not the temporary bridge,
Okay,
but
so
however.
that's what I'm thinking of. That's a line item in the budget is for the temporary bridge that we were bringing in.
But there's not a line item in the bridge. We just know that we have a contract. I think we previously got an estimated cost of how much it would cost and the time frame
Right,
to
but
putting in place. We have a backup contract to put in.
But that temporary bridge is what I'm trying to get some data points to understand. The temporary bridge, I would assume, is not included in the insurance policy, because the insurance is for the permanent one.
Correct. There is some cleanup included in the bridge policy, cleanup and some other items, but not the temporary bridge. But we do have the emergency fund that hence towards events like that we accumulate, that we will have. Right now we have over $3 million there, and the temporary.
Our insurance cannot insure the temporary.
So this is a good topic to go, and I just wanted to make sure my understanding is correct, or my recollection is, because I know we talked about this 2 years or so ago. How quick is the turnaround time for the temporary bridge to get in?
Brian can answer that because we've gone through that exercise with Philip and Jordan.
Yeah, so I can certainly get the most updated numbers for you, but in the event that our bridge were to go out, God forbid it doesn't, we have a contract in place with our emergency recovery team, and they use a company. The bridge to get here, depending on if it's a single lane or double lane bridge, it would take like 4 to 6 weeks to be passable, for them to come here, mobilize, get it set up, and drivable at that point. And then there's a monthly cost associated with that as well too. And I can certainly get those latest figures during this meeting. I'll look it up right now and get that figure to you. But it's certainly not an insignificant cost associated with a temporary bridge.
All right, so I was not thinking cost as much, although cost is important. I was thinking timing, because what we discussed yesterday was the need to go through tabletop exercises for an unplanned event, such as we're talking about the hurricane. So if we have an unplanned event, a flood, tornado, whatever it happens to be that knocks out the bridge, what are we going to do?
Yeah, and we'd be, for those exercises, happy to bring in our contractors to walk us through that scenario, because they'd be the ones that would be best prepared to kind of give us a scenario
We
about
can't
that.
wait 4 weeks for a temporary bridge.
There's other measures that can be put into place while that temporary bridge, a barge of sorts. There's other resources
Okay.
that can get cars on and off the island as needed. There's other things that can happen while we're waiting for that bridge to be installed. But I can certainly get the latest figures for you, and then those people will certainly be invited to any tabletop exercise we had that
Yeah.
included a bridge
So-
going out.
I'd like to do both. So I do plan on bringing this up, putting out an email to the safety committee to get their thoughts going for having this kind of tabletop. But I would like to understand and get, I don't necessarily need it here now today, but see the paperwork or the contracts or whatever you have on what the contingency plans are if an artery is cut.
Yeah,
What do we
absolutely.
do?
Absolutely. We can work through that in the coming weeks and make sure that you and council has a full understanding of what that would look like.
Great, thanks. And then on top of that, I'm sorry, one more part. So that was for the Kiwa Island Parkway Bridge. What about the bridge right here? That's not ours.
That's DOT.
Talking about the state's.
I know, so
Okay.
what, all right, so I know that. So the point is, what do we do about that DOT bridge? How do we make sure we have access off the island with that bridge?
I guess the thing is that we would have to talk with DOT to ask them what their plans are. So if the bridge was not really compromised, but for Tropical Storm or Hurricane Ida, because of the way the water pushed, they had to come in and they had to look at essentially the piling, or what is that called underneath the bridge? They had to
The
take.
abutments on the
culvert.
bridge,
Yeah, they looked at that. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to sit down with them and say, if there's, for some reason that bridge goes out, what is the plan? Which I'm sure they have a plan to be able to go in and put
Right,
temporary,
that's
but we just don't know the length of time, so that can be part of Brian's.
That's all part of what my brain was thinking in the middle of the night when I do my best thinking when I'm sleeping, is it all came out at that point, and I said, well, geez, what do we do for a temporary emergency egress?
Yeah,
this-
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there would be a little bit of a monetary hit if we were to have to install a temporary bridge.
So this is a great line of questioning, because this is something that we've talked about as part of the comprehensive plan, that when you think about a 10-year plan looking out. And so you raise one issue, but there's a couple of issues there. So one is, we have an insurance policy, we've got a contractor, we can do the analysis. But that insurance and the same contractors, if it hits here, it could hit other places.
Sure.
And so there's going to be a huge draw. So the issue that I have, the concern is not whether we can pay for it. It goes back to your point about the time for which you need to
Timing.
construct it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get a temporary bridge, maybe. How long is that going to take? So there's a lot involved in just the timing if we lose the bridge.
Yeah, I'm more concerned of the timing, not so much the money.
So that's number one. Number two is we have an insurance policy on the bridge, but the causeway, we don't.
Right.
What if the causeway is washed out? That could be even longer time to repair, replace. So in the comprehensive plan, keep pounding this drum, is we need to do a study on the causeway and the bridge and the whole system, not just the bridge itself and the pilings and those things.
Right.
And that is part of what I believe, I need to go back and look at it, the risk assessment report that was done, I think under Councilman Prickett kind of led that effort, was looking at some of those issues. And that's one where I mentioned yesterday, we need to kind of bring that back out and look at whether we need to completely refresh that. There's other things to add to that.
Well, and there may be other resources, like, besides getting a contractor. I mean, State Emergency Management, Corps of Engineers, National Guard. I don't know if we've explored what they would do in those kinds of emergencies as well.
Well, there's also, we could be reactive and do it like that, or we could be proactive and start looking at.
That's what I meant.
What would we need to do and get funding for just a completely new causeway today or 3 years from now? And get state and federal funds for that. And maybe we'd have to pay for some and to be matching funds, but to make the causeway itself more resilient than it is today.
Well, and you hit on,
Raise good questions about the bridge. It's not just do we have an insurance policy or not? It's a lot
Yeah,
bigger
yeah.
issue than that.
Yeah,
And it's a
exactly.
long-term issue that we're going to have to be, it's a risk that we can't get rid of.
when I meant being,
Anybody know what the design is for either of these two bridges we just talked about? Meaning, is it Hurricane 1 level, Hurricane 3, 5? Does anybody know?
I don't know about SCDOT's bridge, but we'll have to pull the report. But for our bridge, McSweeney engineers, they inspect our bridge. I don't know if it's every 5 or every 7 years. And I know last time they inspected, I know they looked at it after storm. I know they did look at it in terms of the hurricane,
Well, they-
but I don't just remember what they said.
I remember
So we may
looking
have to
at
pull that report.
I remember looking at that for damage, but my question is more, is what is it designed to a hurricane?
I understand what you're
1, 2,
saying.
3, 4, 5?
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah.
When they looked at our bridge, and I think they looked at it twice since I've been here, I thought they had looked at that.
Yeah,
in comment.
we had a bridge inspection a couple years ago, and it was still rated really well. There was no recommendation for any repairs or anything like that. It was kind of just some standard wear, but nothing that they saw was very concerning. So they did not recommend that we do any type of repairs on it at that time. We're coming up for the next inspection from them. We'll probably go ahead and do that this year because I think it's been 3 years. So we'll get another inspection report from the engineers, and I'll make sure that they tell us exactly, what this bridge is rated for, whether that's Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3 up to 5 or anything like that. But the bridge is in really good shape. It was
Yeah,
designed and constructed really well. So there has
remember
been
that
no
report.
concern about that, just for, everything that we've been through up until this point. But we'll have another inspection done from McSweeney
Yeah.
this year.
And we'll look through our records, because I thought when Rusty Lamio was here that they did rate it, but I'm not quite sure, but we will address that. If they didn't, we can get it addressed, but we'll also look through all of our records, because we've.
And like your line of think,
Because to Mr. Farrell's comment, if we have a weak link in our causeway, right? It's not, let's say the whole causeway is only designed to hurricane level 1. I'd be all for upgrading the causeway to strengthen it. So, but we need to find out what the entire road network is designed for.
those are great points. And frankly, just like you, my head goes to weird places when I'm trying to fall asleep. I think of the scenario you brought up, which was great. What if a propane truck is in a collision coming out of the traffic circle? I mean, that could be a cause for the bridge to go out too. It's right there.
Good, sure.
But what I was suggesting before was that we reach out to the state and the Corps, if that's the right, or the Guard, and, we find out proactively, like you were saying, that,
Well, for somewhat separate reasons, we were reaching out, trying to schedule a meeting with the SCDOT
for that.
person here
Yeah.
with regard to bridge issues. It was
They would
much
hopefully
as
know.
anything else, kind of whose responsibility, what might need to be involved in dealing with some issues with DKP or pedestrian access across the bridge, et cetera. But we can certainly add this to the discussion as to, can provide us what their contingency plans or emergency
Yeah.
preparedness plans are with regard to the bridge.
So for this action item, I'll volunteer to follow up, and I'll start with Brian, I guess, to get the data collection pulled together. And then I'll report back to the council when we get our arms around this.
Yeah, I think that would be great, because one of the things I think as I'm talking, a lot of the stuff that you guys have asked, we have done, but I think it's time to essentially memorialize it and pull it together in one document. That way we can see what we're missing. Also, I think we haven't done, I was asking Dorota when was the last time we had our bridge inspected, and it was, I think, for the insurance.
Appraised.
Yeah, and so I said maybe time to, have it appraised, and it was when we had to renew our insurance, so that's been about 7 years. So I said it may be also time to have it reappraised, because we may have
Yeah.
to look at some things.
Excuse me, I remember back even when I was working on the comprehensive plan, so back to what Luke was talking about, I don't think it's adequate to simply be looking at the bridge without taking all, I'm on. I'm green here. To just look at the bridge is myopic. There's been this king tides that have brought the roadway, as you're leaving the island, the roadway around Little Rabbit, and that is almost submerged with, you've got a king tide and you've got the marsh on the side of the road that's almost at road level. And then there's a lot of road that's almost submerged on the other side. So I, like you, would be in favor of, if we've got to do that kind of capital outlay,
Yeah.
we can't abide by 4 weeks of being flooded off on the island or off the island.
And so as you think about capital too, when we put the bike path in, because we took up wetlands, we had to buy wetlands. The town had to buy wetlands to replace what we were putting in. And the state made us buy, I think it was the state or the county, made us buy contiguous wetlands. We couldn't buy them like up in Myrtle Beach. We had to buy them from Buddy Darby or, yeah. And so that's another issue. If we have to replace it or you make it more resilient and you make it wider, there's gonna be a capital outlay to replace the wetlands. So it's a big
How
deal.
does that
We need to get
work?
I'm sorry?
How does that work, replacing wetlands?
We'd have to buy property over here someplace and like from Endell West and create wetlands out of normal property because we're taking up wetlands by making the bridge wider.
Normally, what happens in those cases is the mitigation of damaged wetlands. In my experience, is not buying and creating new wetlands, it's taking wetlands that are destroyed through contamination, pollution, or whatever. And the Army Corps requires a 3-to-1 replacement. For every 1 acre we would destroy for whatever road, we have to repair 3 acres.
When we did the bike path, it was a 1-for-1. I don't know what the regulations are today, but at that time it was 1-for-1, and it was about 2 acres, I think is what we had to buy.
In the financial topic, you touched on this just briefly. I was pleased to hear several times in the conversation yesterday applying for grants and other funds. And I know that I think Bruce has taken a class on how to apply for grants, or at least certain kinds of grants. But I think there are a lot of monies out there. And even though we're sitting on a nice endowment, why not spend somebody else's money? So I think maybe we need to circle around more formalizing policy or process about pursuing grants.
So it relates a little bit to the last topic in this area, is kind of staffing and a conversation we talked about yesterday, which is like this concept of somebody, we use the term chief resiliency officer. That may be a little too elevated or high, but somebody that's focused on some of these resiliency-related issues, that job is to kind of connect with a lot of outside stakeholders, look for on a regular basis opportunities for resiliency-related funding, because that's where a lot of funding is available. It's kind of broadly defined, but a lot of this hardening infrastructure or soft strategies in order to deal with adapt to climate change. But we've, on a one-off basis, we become aware of some and pursue it. There's nobody systematically that I'm aware of looking at that. Some other communities do have those kinds of people. City of Charleston has a complete resiliency office, but obviously they're a much larger city, much more impacted by water than we are. And they can kind of build in that complete staffing infrastructure to pursue that. We also don't really have grant writing capabilities here. So that's it, kind of in the staffing areas, one of the things we might want to tee up to talk about.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And back to the bridge and roadway discussion, I don't know, but are there FEMA funds to take preventative actions to avoid them having to replace stuff down the road? You know, I don't know if there's contributions that are made for those kinds of things, but having somebody looking at that, I think, would be helpful.
The only other thing that I was add, here's a note, is under the topic of review insurance coverage. I know you made a list yesterday, Mr. Mayor, about this building being insured, but is it insured against, like if a hurricane, against all catastrophes?
We definitely want to know, and I haven't looked, that's why somebody wants to make sure we understand what the exclusions are, if any.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Answer that probably now.
okay.
Yeah, so our fixed assets are insured with the state insurance pool. It's offers very competitive rates, offers replacement cost on all the fixed assets. There is a number of exclusions, like with every insurance policy, but we can definitely look at this. I can't remember, but like our premium for the building is, I want to say, a little over $5,000. So anyway, very competitive rate. And
We just want to make.
yeah, we can
want to
look
make
at
sure
exclusions.
for wind
Yeah, yeah,
damage,
absolutely.
flood damage, fire damage.
It's all included.
earthquake,
This is all included. Earthquake, it's all included. But like I said, there are some exclusions, like in every policy. But
And the deductible, do you know what the deductible is off the top?
it's very low. Yeah, I can't remember, but this is really low. Like I remember on our vehicles, we pay less than $1,000 per truck, and our deductible is $500. So like it's very competitive.
What's the number? Around 200,000 or something? I can't remember on the budget. Total insurance.
120, but of it, the bridge. This is with a different insurance company. The state didn't offer this. This is the majority of it. Plus, we also have directors and officers policy. We have liability. So the full number is high because of those. But the state premium is,
But I meant, the total, all our total insurance, budget for insurance coverage is about 220,000, correct?
correct,
Yes.
correct.
Which is,
Low.
yeah, doesn't seem like that much.
Yeah, so as part of this, again, I just think we ought to understand the exclusions and the deductible and what our risks are there too.
Anything else on that first topic area? The second one, I'm happy to kind of go into more detail and answer any questions about some of the things I was raising yesterday, and you know, fresh look at all our restricted funds and our financial assets. But part of it is trying to understand, when I say let's start thinking about strategically investing our funds rather than just continuing to let them accumulate. Baseline is, before we're going to write any large checks to anybody for anything, we need to understand better what our kind of baseline obligations are, and then worst-case scenario, what the
Exactly.
financial obligations are.
Thank you.
Well, I just was going to ask if anybody has gone through a what-if scenario, worst-case scenario. What would be a forecast of our costs and revenue? Because both are going to be affected. But I haven't seen anything like that. Let's say a Cat 3 hits us.
Well, so that it's part of, I've had a lot of conversations with Stephanie and Dorota about some of those numbers at top of the envelope. Part of what this process is, when we're talking about whether it's kind of the reserve study, insurance coverage review, looking at the bridge stuff, is to get a better handle on that. But we do have a sense of what it cost to, if every one of our assets went away, you know, this building is insured, we've got to look at the exclusions. The bridge is insured, but there is cost associated with the temporary bridge as well. As you noted, if the entire 3 miles of roadway is wiped out, you know, you said $1 million a mile, so we know beach renourishment, it can be a big number. Most we've ever had to spend on beach renourishment is $3.6 million. But if you had a really big storm that impacted a large stretch of the beach, it could certainly be significantly more than that. We know what our costs have been for at least cut and toss. Mm-hmm. We know what our costs have been for big storms for cleanup. And you can kind of add all of that up.
Well, I'd like to see that, kind of like an investment vulnerability assessment, just to see where we are potentially.
Yep.
Because we have some experience in the last 5 years for tropical storms and hurricane level 1 maybe, but not a Cat 3. So we have to do some out-of-the-box thinking of what might happen with the Category 3.
Yes, and that's, like I said, I've been doing that at a high level before I even kind of started talking about making some of these other strategic investments to have a better understanding of that. It's not granular. It is high level.
It is, yeah,
And but we need to get more information on that. Then you raised a separate question. It took me a while to get kind of comfortable with this as well, is what are our worst-case scenario kind of revenue-related, expense and revenue-related issues? And, you know, kind of if we were shut down, the island were basically shut down for an extended period of time. if the bridge were out and you had to replace that, and you're basically shut down for 6 months, or longer, if you had a Cat 5 and major damage, it could be a year or two. That's why I was talking about last night, the need to understand that we have really two separate budgets. The accommodations tax, or restricted tax revenues related budget, and then our operating budget. If we're completely shut down, we have no of the accommodations taxes coming in.
Right.
But those are just paid out within a short period of time, can kind of separate out. Look at the operating side of the budget, which is about $8.8 million. Yeah. 3.5 of that is employees' salary and benefits. So if we wanted to keep the staff, fully on board for that entire period of time, you've got an annual outlay of $3.5 million. Almost a significant amount of the other expenses on the operating budgets aside. You would simply not have those expenditures.
Because there's no, yeah, I understand.
You would not have the off-duty deputy contract, and that's $500-some thousand a year. You wouldn't have the landscaping contract. You wouldn't have the trash services contract, and blah, 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 blah. There just isn't that much else in there. So we could carry, the financial impact would not be as severe as one might anticipate without revenues, because most of our expenditures would not be realized.
Right, but this is but the revenue would also be almost gone.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. You would have no revenue, so you, just hypothetically, for 2 years, you had not a $0 revenue. Figure up how much expense you would likely have over that period of time.
So I guess I would just like to see a 1 or 2 page document that goes.
I have a document that pretty much covers a lot of that, what we just discussed. I'll be happy to send out after this meeting. And then you can tell me, I created it, I think, like few years back, so I can add to it or, add update for additional requests that I'm getting now, but I will send it today.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Beautiful.
So, one thing, that the review of permitted use of restricted funds, we started talking last night about, what the permitted uses are. We've never been particularly creative from the town standpoint in applying for those funds, and that's, we're going to start looking at that. But it's also true that the community as a whole, I mean, Councilmember Farrell's chairing the State Aid Tax Committee right now, but it's been kind of the same applicants coming in for the same things for the most part over time, and we need to, beyond just the town's potential application, as it were, for use of accommodations taxes, permitted use of those under the various state statutes, look at other organizations. There have been conversations in the past, for example, about KICA applying for tax funds for boardwalk repair and renovation or something. They've been reluctant to go down that path because of some of these legal questions that we need to resolve and address at some point in time. But there may be other organizations as well that could be using these things, these funds as well. The Conservancy was asking about, for like conservation easements. Unfortunately, as much as I wish it were otherwise, I'm not sure that would be a permitted use of the accommodations taxes. That's where we probably, if we're going down that route, we're drawing off the $22 million of unrestricted general fund balance, as well as the $8 million of capital fund balance, but not the restricted funds, for example.
Right. Understood.
Yeah, one of my goals for State Tax Committee is to get a broader use and broader distribution of those funds. As the mayor said, it's very narrowly used, and the majority is in 2 or 3 big blocks of funds, kind of the resort and LN being probably the 2 biggest. But there are a lot of organizations, and in fact, I've personally encouraged different wildlife organizations to apply for more. There's a dolphin strand feeding organization, there's a shorebird control, or shorebird group that, those two in particular, I've talked to Jim about, making sure they've got the resources they maybe want, but don't know they can get. And so I talked about expanding their budgets. And then there's other organizations who aren't tapping into it now. And so through word of mouth and through other ways, we need to expand that distribution of that ATAX money so it's better distributed and better used.
More in the budget finance side?
I just wanted a clarification. The last bullet talks about options for allocating resources to support long-term strategic goals and priorities. Has that been fully vetted? Is there anything else that is included in that discussion?
We've covered an awful lot of that. That includes resiliency-related investments of our capital assets, whether, you know, we want to elevate the roadway, harden this, that, or the other thing. It includes, you know, what we talked about yesterday, potential reimagining or expansion of the town municipal center. And it includes the, you know, ideas about, for example, if we have opportunities to acquire property, to put them into conservation easement or use as public park resources, or establish, for example, our own Greenbelt Fund or conservation fund.
Right, I just was asking if there's anything else, because one thing that we've talked about a lot, and maybe we shouldn't do it here online, in town council, was the purchase of the real estate building. And we haven't discussed that at all to date, and that's why I was asking if is there anything else out there included in that topic, such as the real estate building?
So, Mr. Berner, the mayor's asked me to put together kind of a blue sky list of what would we spend money for, kind of capital projects. And so I'm in the process of compiling that list. We've talked about a bunch of those here today and yesterday. There are more. I'm going to solicit everybody for kind of long-term blue sky options, what you would do. You mentioned a good one. There are certainly others like that. And then we need
Others that we've discussed, and obviously it's been a matter of public record that we've had conversations about opportunity to purchase the KIRE building, and it would continue to be my view with regard to that piece of property as well as other pieces of property, if it made strategic sense and at a right price point, then we should consider acting on that.
Correct.
So.
And that's the second piece of what I was saying is we need to define the valuation and then the prioritization of all those different options. So more to come on that, but that's being worked on.
I was just going to add nothing in terms of all you guys' discussion this morning, just so that you know, you had asked me, this is in regards to the county's Greenbelt funds. So we have allocated about $30,000 every year. We have a balance sitting, it will come.
So we do have.
Yeah, come July 1st of this year, once we get our new allocation, we will have about $220,000 sitting with the county. Now, we have to go and apply for that money. We still have to meet the criteria set by the county, but we've used Greenbelt funds. I think for you guys know, we use Greenbelt funds prior to Gerota and I working here, but on Beachwalker Drive with regards to that crabbing fishing area, and then we've used it here on the bridge, and those and so we get monitored every year through the county to make sure that we still comply with it being open to the public, public space. That was the conditions of the grant that they gave us at that time. So those are their two Greenbelt funds that the town has applied for in the past, but we do have, come July 1st, about $220,000 that will be sitting available for us.
And as I mentioned yesterday, having a meeting on Friday afternoon, and if anybody wants to join, they're more than welcome to do so. You annually apply for the transportation-related funding initiatives. A portion of that is it involves leisure trails or pedestrian and bicycle trails, enhancing connectivity. And
those are funds we received, some of that for the work that we're going to be doing.
Yeah, but there's also, we're going to come and talk about the county's guide, whether there's something that the county funds could be used in part to create some connectivity up and down Betsy Carson Parkway.
Okay. Good idea.
I guess we can move on to some town administration issues. One of the things that, we're just behind on this, so unfortunately, we're not going to have an opportunity to talk about it a lot here, and it'll just have to be at a future council meeting. One of the things the council had requested was kind of a comprehensive assessment of all of our employee benefits, kind of what the overall cost of them was, both individually and in aggregate, and how they compared and contrasted against a peer group. That work is underway with our HR consultant. I had hoped that we'd be a little bit further along in that. What they had sent was, I guess, some of that had been done by another consultant, Evergreen, before. I've looked at that information, and I didn't find it be particularly useful or responsive to what we had asked for. So that material just isn't ready yet. It is my hope that we can have that available prior to the March council meeting.
All right, great.
Somewhat in conjunction with that, would have mentioned, Councilmember Farrell's helping out with this. I've asked for his assistance, kind of some of the finance administration stuff. In addition, we started with kind of accounting policies and procedures, and we revised and updated those. The council's approved that. One of the action items from the HR consultant's list of things that needed to be done but that had not been done, is now in process, is update and fairly substantial revision of our HR policies and procedures, our HR handbook. That work is well along. We're draft, but there still needs to be some tweaking of that. But there are fairly significant changes from what we've had in the past. And that, again, hopefully we'll be able to present to the council for consideration at the March council meeting.
Wonderful.
What bucket do the most significant changes fall into?
They're fairly wide-ranging and cross-cutting. So fair to say that there were a number of kind of sections of kind of typical HR policies that are not reflected, embedded, or haven't been in our HR handbook. And there was, like, last time the HR consultant kind of add a whole bunch of sections. And if we have a break, I can come back and give you an example of what many of those are. There are a couple of recent issues that have come up where there were unfortunate interpretive issues, I guess is the best way to describe it, with regard to some HR policies and their actual application in recent instances that need to be better defined and addressed, and that's in process as well. There are, things like, one of those is like with our tuition reimbursement program. One is with regard to how we calculate paid time, how paid time off is determined. Oh, that's the list right there. Thank you. For example, one issue that arose was the HR policy manual says whether you get your 20, 30, or however many days, and that's one of these things that's being reviewed as part of the overall benefits package, you get to bank that all come January 1. So as soon as the new year rolls over, what if somebody leaves January 15th? Do they get the entire year's worth of
Yeah, I understand. Rather than earning a certain
earning
amount.
it, or you don't get paid off, it's a pro rata basis. And you bank it, but it's only pro rata paid out. That was an issue that simply was not addressed, as an example of one of the many things. But here's the add guidelines for conduct disciplinary policy. Working off the clock policy. Oh, yeah. add termination discipline, add separation of employment, add job abandonment, add exit interview section, add return of property. And so there were just a bunch of kind of what the HR consultant considered to be standard HR policies and procedures that just weren't reflected in our current HR.
See, well, it's being addressed, that's good. It seems like it was a big hole.
Yeah. So anyway, that is the kind of the key issue. Internal control audit, it's not really, this is really not a town administration issue, it's more of kind of the finance, but I mean, we talked about this at numerous council
have,
meetings.
yeah.
So
That's a big
we will be undertaking an internal control audit, and that's under the purview of the audit committee.
So I have a question. Is that being with an external audit guy or a volunteer
No, that will be outside.
outside?
That will be an audit firm, yeah, that has expertise in conducting internal
This is
control.
This is for.
Internal control,
controls,
yes,
not-
internal control.
Okay.
That's right.
Good.
You have your standard financial statements audit, but this is in addition to that.
Great. I think that's a big need. Good.
And it touches on a lot of different areas. You know, it's not just who's writing the check and how much can they write. It's, you think about internal controls broadly. So it's more broad than just
No, I
how much
understand.
can you,
Yeah.
how much can you write on your check?
That's great news. That's wonderful.
So invite discussion on a couple of issues related to staffing needs. And it ties in a little bit to the next bullet as well, as contractor consultant management. There's always a tension as to when if you have need for certain human resources, whether you bring those in-house or you contract them out. And that's been an ongoing issue for the town and not unusual for the town as well. The problem is, in many cases, we decided, and I think most cases appropriately so, that we'll simply bring in, because it's a temporary need, and bring in outside expertise. We hire consultants. Unfortunately, at least it's my view, that we have not done a particularly good job institutionally of managing consultant relationships. And so.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
So whether it's the recent, police feasibility study, whether it's kind of the arts feasibility study, whether it's the comprehensive
Another
plan.
yeah.
I mean, we've got a lot of examples.
Yeah, we do.
And I don't know quite how to solve for that.
So we've been talking about this, just a simple first step is somebody puts in an application for a check to be written on a contract or a purchase of piece of equipment. There's a simple sheet of paper. Who's requesting it? What are the requirements of the contract? Have these requirements been met? Yes or no, A, B, C, D. Signed by the person who requested it, and if it's part of a planning commission, the chairman of the commission signs it. So maybe John Taylor requested a consultant do stormwater management, has been done, has he got all the plan, checked all these boxes, he signs it, now we can write a check. That's a simple first step. I don't know what else we're gonna do, but at least we do that so we know that has the job been completed before we write the check.
Yeah, 100%,
That's
100%
very simple.
agree. Now, I would add to that, so when I had my consulting business, I mentioned this yesterday about my complaint to CPSM about they did not manage their clients' expectations, we're the client. And that's something I learned really early on in my own business, is that you don't just submit the report and then say, I'm done with my analysis. You have to have continuing feedback and discussions to manage the expectation. Now, if our consultants are not managing our expectations, we need to then get involved and make sure that consultant is fully understanding our expectations. Using the CPSM as an example, this consultant went off on his merry way, did his data analysis, And we only found out the wheels had fallen off the wagon when this report came in, or the draft report came in. We needed to be
I think
involved
we had a
earlier.
sense of it.
The point being, we have to manage also are the consultants to make sure they're going to deliver a product that we want, rather than just sitting back and waiting for that product to come in.
Well, and you certainly, others know better than I, we've got several people in the room who've obviously had to deal with the issues related to the consultant for the comprehensive plan. And that was an example where the consultant was coming in with their ideas that bore little relation, kind of the unique circumstances and needs
Great
of
example.
Kiowa Island.
Great example.
And there was frustration all around, and the consultant would say, and particularly, I always remember when the consultant got there, and I can't remember who was in the planning commission meeting saying, well, we need to make this change, and the other change, and the consultant said, well, we can certainly consider that. And you know, they were imposing their own kind of viewpoint and all that. It was the same thing in web management for the feasibility study for the Arts Center. Initially, they started talking about a lot of stuff, what's going on in the New York City arts community. They really were spending a lot of time on that, and you know, had to kind of steer them in a different direction. Even with regard to when I was talking about the benefit study, the thing that Evergreen had prepared, I just was looking at it this morning, trying to figure out, are we there yet? And there were a couple slides in there. There was a bunch of national, just generic data on kind of financial well-being, and you know, what are these things in different regions, you know, the value in different regions of the country and things like that. And it was just kind of consultant stuff to throw in there that was not in any way responsive to the specific request.
It's just filling space, yeah.
Filling space. So again, we continue to have this issue, and I invite suggestions as to any time. Yes, more.
I don't know how you currently structure your contracts, but I would encourage you to have some more triggers, meaning don't pay as much upfront and have a real performance toggle before you pay them more money, because they're doing our work. We should be able to leverage our money and try to avoid paying, you know, $70,000 and then realizing we got a piece of garbage.
Well, and that's exactly what Councilmember Farrell was alluding to. We need to have milestones in there, and we need to make sure that we're not paying for work that's not been done or has not been done to our expectations and satisfaction.
So it goes to contract.
Yeah. Yes, Joanne?
We need to be able to say to them, when they say that, no, you're not going to consider it, this is our project. We just need, I think, probably stronger, maybe for all of these, stronger point people to instruct the consultants and to draw a line. I know Madeline and I worked very hard to say that the survey was a disaster, but we got nowhere with that. We need to have a better mechanism for controlling what the consultants do. Luke was involved with that as well.
Do you have any ideas on what that might look like?
Microphone.
So Joanne, do you have any other ideas on what that might look like? That stronger leadership?
We can talk about that. I think, I think it has to be, if you're familiar with working with consultants, you know, maybe it's the people that you guys control the purse, maybe saying to some of these boards and commissions, you know, we want milestones. How are you doing? What do you think? And being able to say, no, this consultant's the wrong consultant, and cut your losses.
Yeah, there were circumstances where Joanne, Luke, and I, as a threesome, said, this is not acceptable. This is not,
And we got
you're not
nowhere.
hearing us. And nothing happened, and this went on. I mean, if you were going to write a casebook study of how a contractual arrangement could go wrong, this would be it, because it went on for a couple of years.
I think from my perspective, in that experience, and something that I've put on the list to do is the consultant needs to know who they work for. And I'm not sure, in the case where we're talking about the planning or the comp plan consultant, I don't know who he thought he was responding to, or, because he didn't respond to certain people, and I don't know who he responded to, but
That's a
the person
very
who's signing the
fair point.
check, the person who's ultimately responsible, the consultant knows that's who I work for. And then, let's say it's Ron, you can hold Ron accountable, Joanne can hold Ron accountable, and the consultant knows he's taking direction from Ron. I think that was missing in this last piece.
Well, but I think that is part of the challenge in that the contracts are ultimately with the town. And so the town administration is responsible for, in a sense, managing the contract. And that's always an issue, I think, with the consultant is who are they actually supposed to be dealing with or engaged with? Because you usually have somebody on staff that is ultimately the point person, at least the contact person, but they're really defined usually in the contract as the person responsible for oversight and management of that contract. And we are hiring outside consultants ostensibly for their expertise. And they have expertise that isn't resident within the town administration or on the council. And then certainly I've seen this, I'm not, it's not an issue, I'm not casting blame, but the staff, all whom were very nice for the most part, have a reluctance to push back in some cases on the consultant, in part because the consultant has more expertise on a matter than they do. And also, quite frankly, it's just experiential. You know, my last 4 decades, I've dealt with dozens of consultants. And I have kind of seen the best and I've seen the worst, and I have no issue kind of pushing back. But that's not true of each and everybody on our staff. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that, Stephanie, but it's been an ongoing issue that I've observed as well.
I mean, we're using the example of working with the consultants, LS3P. And we worked with LS3P, the ironic thing is we worked with LS3P from an architect standpoint on this building. And probably the relationship there, when I started, there was a municipal center committee, and there were regular meetings with the full committee. And so there was always also potentially a staff kind of point person to kind of help manage kind of that process. And I think they did great with regards to having that conversation. Fast forward, LS3P got the contract for the comp plan, which their essentially long-term planner was out of Atlanta. And unfortunately, while I do believe that he had some great ideas, John having a planning background, I have a planning background, they were really great ideas. I don't think that they couldn't do their work. I think where some of the meetings I sat in on and what I heard was that, okay, because I remember one time saying, I get mixed-use development. I support it. I want to live in a community like that, but that would fit better in the city of Charleston, not having potentially the mixed-use nodes on Kiowa Island. So, yes, I think the Planning Commission was saying to them, we hear what you're saying, and yeah, that would make sense in other communities. It just doesn't make sense here on Kiowa. And I think that's where the disconnect between Blake, I think his name was, and our planning commissioners is that they kept telling him, these are the things that we don't think is appropriate for Kiowa, maybe for somewhere else. And I think he just couldn't get out of his way to kind of drill it back down. But John worked, I think, very closely with them. And I know John heard the planning commissioners. I believe John did go to them and said, you know, these things don't work. I don't know, John, you may want to comment, but I do agree with what you said. I think staff do push back, but I don't think sometimes they push back hard enough, and sometimes we just may not know the correct direction. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of time with our comp plan, And lo and behold, staff is writing it.
Again, this
now.
subject is bigger than the comp plan, so
Yeah.
I don't want to get too
Right, too
buried in
bogged
this
down in it.
example.
Well,
But my point is, somebody who's a subject matter expert needs to be working with the staff, so the staff doesn't need to be a subject matter expert necessarily. The staff needs to know that the job is completed, and somebody's telling them this job is completed, and the subject matter expert or the staff can be the one who says, yes, the job is completed. But for neither one to happen and us write a check to the consultant and the job is not done, that's what we need to prevent going forward. So I don't want to get buried in this example, but that's the goal, is to get the consultant to do their job, have somebody responsible for overseeing them, and have that person involved in authorizing the payment.
Well, it just, absolutely, and this is coming down the pike, whether we end up this year or not. We've talked about, hiring a consultant to do a complete rewrite of ZLDR, for example. I mean, okay, but ultimately, there needs to be clear direction, need to clearly write and draft an RFP to understand what our objectives are. There needs to be constant ongoing kind of feedback as to what the goals and objectives are and what milestones we're meeting along the way. And that's just kind of one of many that we're going to be probably considering. And we've got to do a better job.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to, I think Councilmember Farrell kind of alluded to what I think, from my perspective as staff and the consultant engagement, is that the consultants particularly, and you said not to dwell specifically on the comp plan, I think, but it's tangentially related to any engagement I think we have with any third party consultant, is the ability for the consultant to know exactly who they report to. And so the issues of the Planning Commission, I think, that arose is that everyone was sending directly things that I want, and he heard 10 different things, opposed to a concise sort of direction point from as a general Planning Commission, as opposed to, this is what I want, this is what this person wants. And so I think that is also part of that, who is directly engaging.
So we have to figure out for each different kind of issue, who will the point person be? And I'll go away from the comp plan, so I'll go to the safety, the CPSM. Should it be council person, me? Should it be the safety director, Craig? Or should it be somebody else? Or if there's another committee, the safety committee, who ideally should that person be?
So, again, there has to be a point person in the contract, and it really has to be somebody in the town, because the contract's with the town administration. What we need to overlay on that is, kind of in a sense, council continual oversight. Supervision of that relationship as well, and then a point person, a council member that will probably work with staff member and the consultant to make sure that some of this basic blocking and tackling is.
Yeah, so I'm not against that. I actually threw it out because I'm not really sure what the right answer is. So I'm okay with going down the path of having a staff person do that. But I just wanted to make sure that is going to be consistent, so we don't have things falling through the cracks.
Well, at the end of the day, it can be, if they're the subject matter expert and can say, yes, this piece is done, they may have to rely on somebody else to say, was the bush planted, or was the bridge built, or whatever.
And by the way, there are exceptions to what I just said, because both the Planning Commission and the Audit Committee, for example, are separately empowered.
Yeah, we have our own hiring.
So that would be an instance where a member of the Audit Committee could determine that the point person on the internal controls audit and/or other audit would
Financial
be
audit.
an Audit Committee member, or the Audit Committee chair, as compared to the Finance Director, for example.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the important piece is having the milestones that the consultant knows that that's what their goal is, and that's the biggest piece. Second piece is having somebody to judge whether they've met those milestones.
I'm going to throw in a third piece, because I agree with those two pieces, but I just know from my own experience where consultants have gone awry is they march down a certain path before they have somebody from the client side touching them to make sure they're going down the right path. just like the examples we were discussing here today. There has to be a touching before a milestone to make sure they're not wasting effort and time.
And in project management speak, that's your typical
100%.
kickoff meeting.
Yeah.
Where you say, here's where we're going.
Necessary, but not necessarily sufficient, because all those meetings were had in each and every one of the recent consulting relationships.
No, that would be true too. Well, so we need more communication is what I'm hearing.
We have a question over here.
Is there a process by which these consultants are selected?
Yes.
Yes.
What is the process? Are we going to other municipalities and?
No,
We
Well,
put out an
for the-
RFP, and then we have consultant responds, and then the subject matter experts in that area, the planning commission say, okay, this is a consultant, in conjunction with the staff, say, this is who we want to hire.
Well, Ron, one thing is very critical. We've kind of had a standard form of RFP, but that's all just kind of the boilerplate language. The most critical aspect of an RFP is appropriately defining the requested services. Again, necessary but not necessarily sufficient. An example of that is the CPSM contract. The original draft, was prepared, was basically to stand up a police force. That was way that was phrased. That was an instance where I redrafted the scope of services, and then that became the needs analysis and gap assessment. That was supposed to be, what was actually in the words in the RFP, what was supposed to be the work that was being done. So again, necessary that we do that well. The problem was they still didn't do that particular work. They started going off on a separate tangent. And, you know, again, there were a host of issues there regarding being able to access data and things like that. But, you know,
but to answer Ron's question, you know, there was a selection committee with respect to CPSM, and I'm pretty sure, it's my knowledge, every contract of this sort, where I was on that committee, there was safety director was on the committee, and two two public entities with a lot of, or volunteers with a lot of experience in that area. We went through a rating system of a 1 to 5 rating system on quality and a whole bunch of other items. So at the end of the day, you were able to mathematically add up who had the best score. We did the right thing, but what I really think we failed with respect to CPSM, we had the kickoff meeting, but then there was no more real in-depth communication until the draft report came out. There has to be more interim touching.
And as far as process is concerned.
I know, but then how did this happen?
Well, and the process on the comprehensive plan, for instance, was that John went out to at least one member of the planning commission with 4 different RFP submissions. I was that person. I reviewed them all thoroughly. There were 2 companies that were clear standouts. Both we had experience with. The one that we didn't pick was the Lucas Hernandez company. I mean, the process was followed, as was yours, but it broke down. So I think preliminarily, all the right steps were taken. But, and again, I don't want to belabor this one particular example, because everything that could go wrong went wrong. But I think the various points that you guys have elaborated, if we follow them and we've got strong leadership and we've got people who are really willing to dig in and know the subject matter and follow up on it, I think we probably can get better consultants.
I think what many have said in various ways in the last few minutes, and I mean, I'm a consultant, I run a consulting business, and what you're saying is accurate. I've hired many consultants, and the reality of a consultant, like I think everybody said, is there's a lot of hands-on. It's a lot of work hiring a consultant. It's not fire and forget. And, you know, just understanding that in the get-go. And I can't count the number of times I've hired a consultant for something, and at the end of the day, I put so much time in it myself, I wish I'd just done it myself.
There's a little bit of that. It says consultant and contract management. We also, just as a town, need to do a better job of managing our contract relationships apart from consulting relationships. And understand the same thing. Oh, you kind of use the term fire and forget. It's that, the contract is, there are a lot of provisions, and you hopefully spell out all the relevant obligations, and there needs to be kind of constant review and monitoring of whether the contractual obligations are being met now. There are some examples of that, don't need to belabor that, but we need to just do a little bit better job of contract management.
Yes.
Now, some of this all relates to, because I talked yesterday about, we've got to review a lot of our contracts and kind of who's drafting these things, who's drafting the RFP terms and things like that. Do we have the requisite expertise? And that starts to touching upon some other staffing needs. And I want to revisit one topic that I'd first raised with the council probably close to a year and a half, 2 years ago now. And I've had this conversation with our town attorney, is, again, whether it is appropriate to consider hiring in-house legal counsel. Rather than simply relying for legal services on an outside firm. Stipulating that outside expertise on specific matters is going to be necessary in any event. The increasing concern that I have, and I say this with the utmost respect, I actually do respect the talents of Mac McQuillan and his team and his firm, Ross Appel and others as well, as it's getting increasingly difficult to be able to actually get timely response from them on a wide range of issues. They're not here today, neither Mac or Boone, because they're in depositions. A lot of time, all-day mediations. They've been in mediations for us, but Mac himself represents 2 other municipalities, as well as other firm, private sector clients, et cetera. And there are a whole host of issues, and this is a conversation I actually had kind of with Jim, and bless his heart, and others, where, all of a sudden we want to draft an ordinance, but ends up being that a staff member or council member is drafting the ordinance. Maybe very well intended, maybe the key substantive elements in there are not, but as we're finding, and I'm certainly finding time and time and time again, that has led to a host of problems. There's inconsistencies in the ordinances. They've kind of grown up over trees. Sometimes the language is unenforceable in the way it's drafted. And I've tried to get council to actually specifically do a host of things. And it's like, literally, what's the one we've got coming up next week? We still don't have it.
Yeah. Oh, in regards to the beach patrol.
Yes.
Yeah.
And literally, no,
No, it's not
it's the
beach
landscape,
patrol.
landscape.
It's the landscape one.
So, before we're bringing something to the council, we really need an answer for them on something, and it's been now requested.
Yeah, we're gonna probably may have to go another month
No,
because
yeah,
they have not, nobody's followed.
Responded. So I don't know.
Okay, I think the answer is then, I like Mac as well, but if he's not being responsive, well, then maybe we should go somewhere else. If that's the problem,
It's not that any outside, if you go with an outside firm, there's 2 issues. One, every time you ask a question, it's an extra $300, they say. But, so you can't simply walk down the hall and say, could you look at up all this stuff? Can you review every single ordinance? Can you be the one that actually drafts and reviews every contract, et cetera? Ideally, we'd like to have somebody, a professional, doing that. If we hire another outside firm, that isn't going to change at all.
well,
I think
you would have to make sure that it does change.
I think that I'm tracking with what you're saying. And, from my perspective, both of my military and corporate careers, my JAG or my attorney was sided with me all the time. I probably spent more time talking to the attorney in both roles than a lot of the people on my staff, because little things come up all the time. And you gave some examples of ordinances and things like that. I'll tell you, just since I've been elected, in conversations we've had and things that I've been trying to initiate, I really wish I could just drop in on the attorney and talk to him for a few minutes.
I would be in there every day, kind of multiple times, much to their chagrin probably. But there's so, and it's literally a lot of times just looking up the state code. Or, this issue that came up about, they should be the point person. They should have already resolved this issue of do we have to pay the state assessment, for example. It's just one of many little issues I can't literally get an answer to because it's Adam and it's Mac and they're all busy and all of that. Now, just so from an operational standpoint, I think we have enough to justify it. Others may disagree. Then there's the economics associated with it. It's hard to say how the economics would wash out. I think probably it's going to be you're not going to save any money. You might end up spending a little bit more because all in, I'm thinking what I've looked at town attorneys that are in-house, whether county council, city of Charleston, et cetera. Your good ones are going to be kind of 150 plus, and then all in, that's going to be 200 plus. We're still going to need to retain outside counsel on specific matters, like with the development agreement or mediations and things like that, reviews of anything that may be a kind of a litigation-related matter.
You're hiring a general counsel.
Yeah. We're hiring a general counsel. They're the ones that should be engaging and be the point person.
It would be helpful if their expertise is more along the lines with things like zoning and things that we do, but.
Well, just a municipal attorney, you need really a good young generalist who is literally can do basic drafting of ordinances, review ordinances, can review contracts and figure out if they need to go outside in order to get some additional expertise or not on any particular matter. I just toss it out there because we're a lot of things that would need a legal set of eyes and review are kind of piling up. And I don't know quite how to solve for that because we just can't get timely responsiveness. And I just don't believe that another firm, outside firm, is necessarily going to solve for us that. And that's the question. Do we have enough kind of workload, or are there enough issues out there that warrant consideration?
So I'll ask a rhetorical question, and it kind of goes back to the consultant management. Have you shared this with Mac about the time frame?
Yep.
And does he have a response, or I'll try and do better, or what's the...
I mean,
If we have the need,
yeah,
he's getting billable hours.
He knows it's an issue, and if it's really like I need an answer kind of right now, or it's something that can be answered very quickly, he's generally pretty good. He'll respond, and I can pick up the phone and call him. But when I say here are 5, issues we need to deal with over the next week or two, then in that case, kind of none of them get done. And in some cases, we actually have things that really do need to get resolved because we're saying we're bringing it to council. Before we bring council, we need your answer on this.
So my second question is there somebody else at his firm that is maybe subordinate to him that we can pull in through Mac? So Mac, if you're not available, delegate that to Bill and let Bill get back to me.
Well, that's supposed to be Boone Aiken.
But I would like to at least explore that kind of an approach before we move forward and hire somebody full-time. So let's just play the game. Assume there's somebody at Mac's firm, or that he could bring on somebody who would be attached to Kiowa for a year, but would be their employee and would be, again, 100% of their responsibilities would be to dig in, take care of Kiowa issues, learn our ordinances, municipal codes, all of that. And then we would have the opportunity to assess that performance, assess that need, assess the whole cost-benefit piece of it after an X period of time, let's say after a year. And so it would Perhaps after that year, we go, yep, we have the need, we have all of the issues, this person has developed the expertise that we were looking for, we're going to bring them on as a full-time employee, as a possibility.
Well, what I
Because
would say is, if I were a partner in the firm, I would have no interest in doing that if I'm got a good person. I don't want to lose them. In fact, I would have a non-solicitation. Might have a non-solicitation provision. Last thing I want to do is have one of my young guys or girls or ladies get really expert on something and then, you know, lose them a year from now. Plus, the way that legal firm economic model works is, you know, they're hiring out the young people, but they're still subject to supervision, is, you know, $250 an hour. So if you're getting 2,000 hours out of them, which they're trying to bill, they're trying to generate $500,000 in billables. You're not going to save any money from the town standpoint.
well,
I
then,
just don't understand why, I'm going from my own experience where I lived in New Jersey, bigger community than this with respect to population. We even had our own police force. We didn't have a full-time in-house counsel. And my rhetorical question is, what's different? And I really don't have the ability to answer that, but I'm going from where I lived in Jersey with the police force, and we had to deal with a judge that we hired outside. They didn't have in-house counsel. Why are we different? Are we demanding more? What is?
You can blame me as much as anything else. Yes, yes, we are. I am, but I think we have had, in part because we have such a unique governance structure. We've had all of these issues related to development agreements, competing jurisdictions.
Development agreements too.
Well, those, no other municipality has a development agreement that covered the entire municipality.
Not the entire municipality.
But that's
yes,
exactly kind of the thing that, you know, we're dealing here. You know,
Right. We had a whole bunch of patchwork development agreements. And
So I don't think it's,
I don't know why this is different.
I think it's different, and I don't think we need to worry about why. I think we do have a higher demand for legal services. We just need to focus on how do we solve that problem? Is it MAC? Is it MAC getting more attention from Boone? Is it hiring an outside? Is there a third option?
Well,
I will take that, we need the help. It's just now, how do we get it? What's the source?
I mean, there are other examples, and I don't know, there was another individual who, I wasn't part of the selection process where it led to MAC. There was another, it was a woman who had been she had been a
with
municipal
IOP.
attorney, IOP.
Yeah, she was there.
And,
Same firm?
no, she was kind of a sole practitioner.
Her and her husband had their own firm, but yes.
And, you know, whether or not they, you know, would basically take on just, a more limited number of clients, they didn't have the same kind of overall firm economics and billable pressures. They're just kind of they work as hard as they want to, basically, in order to generate just enough income. And they were semi-retired, I think.
Yeah, so I think the reason why they weren't selected, so as you guys know, historically, the town, we used to have an in-house attorney, Dennis Rode. When he retired, then council had decided that they just wanted to go contract, but they still wanted solo practitioners. So then that's when we got Mr. Green and then, of course, Mr. Wilson. After Mr. Wilson essentially decided not to seek his contract renewal, then the discussion with regards to who was part of the selection committee, and I was part of that group, was it boiled down to the individual female who essentially her and her husband, but she was a municipal attorney, and then it boiled down to Haynes or Sinclair Boyd. What the deviation from a solo practitioner is that they felt like having essentially, the hope was we would have both worlds. We would essentially have an attorney assigned to us, knowing that Boone would work with MAC, but then we would have the luxury of having all of the additional background sources. With the sole practitioner, that person would have to go out and constantly seek different specialties, and the idea was we would go with a larger firm who ideally would have all those specialties in-house. So that was kind of the reason why council decided at that time to recommend going with the firm as opposed to sticking with essentially a solar practitioner.
I do remember that.
And the issue, wouldn't have a problem if it were outside a 1099 relationship, contract, and not necessarily an employee. It was a sole practitioner, and basically, we were the only client of the sole practitioner.
Or one of you, maybe two.
No.
Oh, I thought you meant before.
No, I would
Moving
just, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
they're an outside contracted employment, but basically, we're the only person, the only client.
So with the contractor, though, as an alternative, it's one of those, hey, I thought about you, cha-ching, here's another hour. That does limit our ability to ask questions on the fly. Is there a retainer kind of model?
Well,
where-
there was, and previously with Joe Wilson, I don't know about Dwayne before that, so it was a retainer model. It was kind of, well, I'll give you, 20 hours a week, or, no, it wasn't that much. I can't remember what.
Yeah, I think it was initially 25, but
A
then it went
quarter
up
of
to
his
like
time.
40.
It was kind of assumed
a
to be, it
month.
was for $120,000 retainer, the kind of understanding it's going to be a quarter of my time. But then there started being more demands. Yeah, and then he said, well, I can't justify the retainer contract anymore, so I want to go to hourly.
The other thing that I would, and we've had this conversation, Mr. Mayor, if we've got a finite amount of resources that we're going to use to employ people, then I think we have to assess what other needs that we've got. And you and I have talked about the resiliency issue and the wisdom of bringing all of the disparate elements of resiliency planning and execution under one body. And when I look at the needs of the community, that one for me takes a higher priority than bringing on board somebody legal. Now, if we're going to do a full assessment and there's no cap on the number of people that we hire, we're a pretty small town.
Well, there's, my view, there were definitely not, we're not just simply saying we're going to hire a bunch of people just to hire. I think we do need to
No,
prioritize, because we have other potential staffing needs. I mean, Dorota, you want to talk about, one that you've been interested in?
Yes, so I requested or brought to the council attention last budget season that I would like to have a revenue and a auditor or in a capacity of looking at the revenues for different revenue sources. As you all probably remember, we did this project with the audit committee that we hire our auditor to audit 10 biggest contributors to our business license revenue, and about half of them underreported. So I know there is not the potential, but because some of them is, some of the businesses, they probably don't know the definition of the gross receipts that we require, so it's not that they're cheating on purpose. Some are just comfortable with reporting what they did last year. In that regard, this year, the business license process, renewal process starts next week, and we're going to start requiring some documents actually verifying the gross income. So I feel that this will help with that verification, but there are other revenue sources that we just don't have resources to look at. Like the mayor was talking yesterday about the franchise agreements. We do have an agreement that we can require or ask for the list from Berkeley, for example, for our franchise fee that pretty much runs pretty flat for a number of years.
It's almost like an even dollar amount.
Yes, but we can request a list of all the payers, but I need staff to look at that, to compare, to look at the new developments or new homes and compare if they are on the list. In the past, it was years ago, we discovered that some of our rentals pay accommodation taxes to Charleston rather than to us. So they are paying them, they're just paying it to the wrong municipality. So this is a matter of comparing two lists. So it's just time-consuming projects that my staff unfortunately can allow a lot of time to it. We do random audits, but they mostly like for 2 months when we're done with other everyday activities. So I would like to request that if you, and I feel like this is an ongoing project. This is not one time, because we have new rentals, we have new or sales. There is local option sales tax. So there's a lot of opportunities to make sure that we are getting everything reported as we should.
I just have to throw a wet rag on this. Just generically, without looking at any particular substance, I wish I had the paper in front of me, but I do not. Our salaries have doubled in like 5 or 6 years. And we're looking at going higher again. Again, I'm going back to why do we have to increase staff so much? And maybe we do, but a doubling of our salaries and doubling of the staff in such a short period of time, and then we want to go even higher.
Well, this position actually would bring revenue, and I can't guarantee, but would probably pay for itself. For example, even just the past example that the mayor mentioned, we had this meeting with the builders. And when I mentioned that now they're gonna have to provide income verification, we have one of the big builders asking if what they provide now for the contract, if we can use that. So I said, yes. However, if there is any change orders, do they report to us? Then it was quiet. So we don't have, so on a permit fee even, the change orders, you all know how they can run, in thousands. So there is opportunities in that, for that position, that will bring money and to pay for itself.
Same comment.
So I'm not.
We're spending.
So I actually I specifically asked the question. I need to go back and kind of look to some of the other mayors, because, Sullivan's and Foley are all kind of similarly sized to us, IOP, in terms of population all. And some of them have higher employee counts because they have police forces. And, in that case, the police force almost doubles the size. But I think it's fair to say that we are already slightly on the high side in terms of our head count relative to some other firms, other municipalities. We have a lot more than, for example, Seabrook. We have a lot larger budget, but we've got the same number of full-time residents.
I guess I'm just really.
No, I think it's
I just want to throw it out there.
I think it's a legitimate concern, and a legitimate issue. We added 2 new members. It used to be just John. We added 2 new members to the planning team. One, in part, because we brought on the tree ordinance. Is it typical to have a 3-person planning department? Do we think it's too many, too little? Kind of look at each one. One thing we do have that is unique, that I actually think where we have a fair amount of employee expense and added employee headcount relative to other towns, is Jim and his team. Nobody else has anything like that. That's one where, sorry, Jim, that you're called out here, but that happens to be one where I say, kind of weigh the priorities and balancing competing interests. I've said that's money, not just kind of well spent, but truly does,
I love having the biologists.
Now, where it starts.
But Jim's been here for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about the last 5 or 6 years.
Well, because he added one. They added Michael. So, when he came in and requested that, the council approved it. But yes, it keeps going up. What is the right size of the finance, function? And one can make a case, Gerardo, you're not going to want to hear this, but that, you know, the amount of additional revenue that might be gained is kind of very marginal, at least it was in the terms of the little audit process that went through the underreporting as to, you know, you know, is that kind of move the needle? Is that where we should allocate resources? We have, right now, we're in the process of hiring, and it's kind of a replacement. So we'll have returned to 3 code enforcement
Yes.
officers. Is that 1, 2 too many? Is that 1 or 2 too few? I don't know. It kind of depends on what we and the community expects in terms of code enforcement. Do we want, you know, to have community service officers, code enforcement officers being able to provide, you know, have at least 2 people every day transiting island in the evening? Right now, we contract out some code enforcement. I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, I'm not saying I'm not for it, look, but, you know, and I'm just 1 vote out of 5, but it's, the point, again, is
Yes.
it's alarming to me to see the growth of this staff in the last 5 or 6 years.
Well, I can't, what else, where else have we added on? I mean, I've added specifically, you know, 2 to financial, video, 2 to planning, 1 video production, 1 to wildlife. So we've had at least 4 kind of added. You know, Michael in addition to Brian, who actually has done a lot of the IT as well. So we haven't added a huge number of people, but they've also, their salaries have continued to grow up and the cost and benefits associated with that, yeah.
It's,
So the
you just
other,
have to be mindful.
Yeah,
the other thing to, I'm playing devil's advocate to myself. We're a wealthy community. We have tons of resources. We've got the $42 million. Do we want to nickel and dime and not add people when we have a community that arguably is more engaged than many other communities, raises a whole lot more issues? I don't know that we want to be penny wise and pound foolish. Perhaps we do staff up where it's needed.
I completely agree we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. As I said yesterday, kind of my Midwestern Lutheran Presbyterian upbringing, I'm a kind of a value geek. I'm not a cheapskate, but value. But every dollar we spend, I want to make sure that that's an appropriate and prudent expense. It doesn't matter kind of what the dollar amount is. But having said that, we can afford more things than other communities can. We're generating a surplus virtually every year. Yes?
This goes back to the lawyer aspect. I would not want to nickel and dime. That is one thing
I think we don't do. And I think having worked in a law firm and did municipal work, a lot of it, you have to understand the economics and you have to make it work. If you want that kind of response, you're going to have to make it work for the law firm economically. And it may mean you have to renegotiate the deal. There may have to be a blended rate where the blended rate is higher than the normal associate rate so that MAC can then bring in lawyers to do that. But there are ways to dealing with that. But in addition, I also agree that it may be prudent just to bring somebody in, and maybe that may be the way to do it. But if you're going to deal with a law firm, you're going to have to deal with the law firm economics, as you noted, Brad, and it's just, it appears right now it's not working for them. And that may be one of the issues he has. He may just not be able to get help internally. So I think you need to.
Well, I think they actually will be happy to have billable hours, although they decline billable hours on the development agreement side. The fundamental issue I have with Mac or Boone or anybody's outside counsel is we have to pay them by the hour to read and understand our municipal code, our ZLDR, our development agreements, all our contracts and review. it's not their job to each and every day come into the office and look at those kinds of things and understand those things. So they're having to get educated, and Mac will note that we know more about our unique circumstances and our code and our agreements than they do. They can provide legal advice around those and kind of compare and contrast other experiences, but they don't know our code, they don't know our agreements, they don't know our contracts as well as we do, and to get them up to speed on all of that,
Yeah, you have to pay for it.
have to pay for
Yeah,
it.
it's a learning curve.
Just like, the whole idea of, hiring outside firm to get on the development agreement is literally spend 10 hours at $500 an hour just to read the damn prior development agreement and take some notes and have your associate look at it.
Yep.
Which is, rather than somebody that's their job each and every day, is to know those things inside and out. Uh-oh.
First of all, you have $515,000 in your professional services budget. Now, I know that's not just lawyers, but the incremental addition to have of that budget number that you would pay potentially for an in-house is so well worth it. I have stood at that podium for 3 or 4 years and repeatedly said, this violates the statute. This part-time situation we had prior to MAC was horrible for this town. And you are so lucky you didn't get sued multiple times for some of the stuff that was going on. And that is not something that Kia should, strive for. We need constant, better legal resources. So if that means taking part of your legal or professional services budget and adding 50,000 to it or 100,000 to it, oh goodness, do it, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Joanne?
I just want to say from prior experience with municipal lawyers, and I've been doing this for about 15 years with municipalities. Thank you.
I would just say that you need to be sure that if you were to do something in-house, I don't know how much lawyers make more, and Brad could probably answer that a little more. You don't want someone green out of law school. I would be concerned about the experience level and experience with municipal issues. We did not, in my previous town, have an in-house lawyer. We did have a law firm that had been with the town forever and knew the town well and knew municipal law well and was very good at saying when we had issues, whether it was lawsuit type of issues or whatever, here's the situation, here's what I recommend, here's what's been happening in other situations with this issue, and giving us good data to make a decision. I don't know, someone said to me, it was a prior planning chair, when we had problems with some of our previous legal advice, he had a great analogy. He said, the pond in which you fish for these guys is pretty shallow. And can you get the appropriate level of expertise at whatever we can pay for?
Well, that's going to be a challenge, Joanne. My own bias actually is not to have somebody that's been simply in the municipal world, because I think the kinds of issues that we tend to need more are basic, a smart kind of young lawyer or generalist who's been trained up in a good firm, who has experience in drafting contracts. We need somebody who knows how to review and draft contracts, who's involved in RFPs and procurements. That could have been in the private sector or the public sector. There's some unique aspects to that in the municipal side. There is statutory background, who actually knows how to draft statutes, knows how to draft rules and regulations. That can translate into the municipal side. My experience is that the ones that have been singularly focused on municipal stuff, no kind of municipal issues, they're not as good as the other stuff. And again, it's kind of my bias. If somebody's really good at the other stuff, it's easier to learn the municipal. than the other way around. That's just my particular, Ron.
I agree with Joanne as far as the quality of person you're gonna get. The other thing to factor in too is when you're searching for this person, is this a job that's gonna be a career builder for that young person, or is this kind of a dead end? I think that's gonna also weigh in what kind of candidates you get. Somebody wants to continue to see their career building over the next 10, 15 years, is this a good job for that kind of person?
A great question, Ron, and I don't kind of know inherently how to answer that. I think you have a couple of possibilities. One might be somebody who's been in the municipal world previously, who's kind of maybe a little bit later stage of career, wants to dial back a little bit, has a lot of expertise, but this is kind of the thing that they just want to do and do for a period of time. I think there's another potential model. There are maybe like the number 2 lawyer at the city of Charleston, or the somewhat mid-level that's kind of a fast riser that can't get the top job right there from Hilton Head, Myrtle Beach, city of Charleston County, or something similar that sees this as an opportunity to come in the town of Kiowa Island, step up in responsibility, probably a step up in pay, and then maybe, this is not necessarily their end game or end goal. There's going to be bigger opportunities. Maybe they'll get hired in a private sector firm at some point in time because they've demonstrated that they're the best, town attorney in the state of South Carolina, and that opens up opportunities. I think there's a couple different routes there. No question, you want talent. You want good talent. I wouldn't want to go down this path unless we were able to get somebody good.
You need something to do.
The problem is, South Carolina bar, you have to actually take the South Carolina bar, which you can't waive in, which would be an impediment. But going to Ron, your point, having worked with a number of attorneys and see the career path, some choose career paths because they're tired of the billable hour chase in a large firm. They like the work, but they don't like to have the hassles of a big firm. It may be attractive to some very good people. Obviously, you have to make sure that's true. I mean, I agree with everybody. We have to hire somebody that's really quality. But there are people out there that, for whatever reasons in their life or whatever, they want to do this type of work and may be willing to do it and are still very smart, capable lawyers.
You brought up a good point, Brad. I've heard many people complain about South Carolina not letting you waive in. But it makes me wonder, for this role as a general counsel, do we care if they've passed the South Carolina bar? Or do they need to have passed?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, let me answer it in 2 ways. Do I really care if there are a South Carolina barred lawyer? No, but they have to be. And I think the one frustration I've had with the South Carolina bar is it is very self-protective. Yeah. And the idea that you can't hire the, best firm out of New York, Washington, Charlotte, Atlanta, or whatever.
In Charlotte, that's the problem.
Bill, I would want us to put together a fairly complete list a wish list of other positions that we think need to be created and or filled and or expanded upon, revised, whatever, before I would be able to take a firm position on this.
And I think that's absolutely fair, and it's just like when the conversation we had about looking at employee benefit, any employee benefit adjustment to any one in isolation, we needed to kind of look at everything in the aggregate. So I would say that we need to try to, as you said, assess kind of all the potential new staff additions that people might be interested in, and then a cost associated with that, kind of a range of cost associated with each one of those. And then we'll come back and have a further conversation about all that.
I think that's the best thing I've heard so far in this conversation, is to put together a comprehensive list of hiring values and evaluate what our needs are based on that. Otherwise, I've sat very quietly, it's been an interesting conversation to hear lawyers' say that you need more lawyers. That was the first one. Thank you, Brad. Engineers saying we need more engineers. That happened earlier. Thank you for us. But this is a critical need. I think I do understand, having been involved in the mediation, the need for responsive, timely communications, good communications, people who are expert subject matter. I don't know the best way to solve this, but I do think we ought to think hard about this if we're not getting the services from MAC, and what do we need to do? Again, I would suggest the first thing is to have a heart-to-heart with MAC and say, I need this now. Can you solve this for me, or can you get somebody to solve this? But then after that, if it doesn't happen, then we need to take another course, because we need the help.
Well, and in part, one of the things they said, the firm is interested. We've actually had a conversation with MAC about kind of a comprehensive review of, apart from the ZLDR, comprehensive review of our municipal code, because we've identified a host of issues, some that aren't consistent with state law. That's an issue that KIK had been dealing with in some of their covenant-related issues. There are many that are just internally inconsistent, some that are just poorly drafted. And there are some, yeah, we're willing to do that, but number one, actually kind of getting them focused on that, how you break it out and do it in chunks, and then that's a very expensive undertaking. And that's just one project.
And again, that's something we need to do almost regardless of the cost. We need to get that right.
Yeah, I agree with Luke. I think from the work that Mac's firm has done that I've observed, what we've seen has been good. The direction to us has been clear. They've been very good about listening and acknowledging the uniqueness of Kiowa. So the first place I'd want to go is to Mac and his firm and say, these are our needs, how can you accommodate them? After that, if they can't, then I'm willing to entertain other options.
And again,
Mr. Mayor,
I've had.
This may be one like the example where, he recommended that they go to another outside firm. I forget what we were talking about.
That's the development agreement.
Development agreement. The drafting of ordinances may be the same thing. He may not like that type of work. Maybe he can do it, but he doesn't really want to. Maybe ask him directly, is there somebody you would recommend who would do this specific task, or draft of the contracts or the ordinances or things like that? Maybe it's just not in his desirable zone for legal work.
Again, it's the overall set of issues have been teed up with him, just need to have a more granular conversation. But part of it is, what is the council's appetite for, if necessary, going another direction. So, but we'll come back with additional information.
We'll cross that bridge if we have to.
All right, we take a break?
Yes.
Okay,
Good idea.
take a 10 or 15-minute break. Actually, we can take a full 15-minute break. I think we're fine on.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Let's go ahead and get started again. So looking at the next agenda items, we've actually spent some time already discussing many of these, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on them again. I know we do have members of the Planning Commission, and we certainly invite them to chime in as to the Planning Commission's agenda. But we actually talked yesterday already about the first item, kind of beach, marsh, and our public roadways, potential overlays, whether we have the regulatory tool sets to address every issue that might arise. And I believe the Planning Commission will start looking at those issues themselves, and if not, we can certainly take council action to so direct, but I don't know if that's necessary or not. Okay. Okay. I would just note, with regard to the use table, and there's a bunch of other kind of rifle shot things long before we get to potential complete rewrite. One of the concerns I've had about the use table, and this is something Councilmember Heidingsfelder and I had looked at and spent some time on previously, is our use table was basically just adopted or adapted from Charleston County. And there's a wide range of uses in there that one might argue don't really fit into the town of Kiowa Island. Many of those are not permitted uses, but they're conditional uses. This isn't anything directed specifically at our planning director, but any planning director is, if it's a conditional use, then it can be approved unilaterally by the planning director without any other input from the Planning Commission or BZA. There are special exceptions, which some are special exceptions, which would require the BZA. I think if one looks through a lot of those and you're spending any time at it, and I don't think we need to belabor it here, there's a lot of those you would say, gee, if this were going to be considered, shouldn't be by right, and with all due respect, the planning director themselves should not have the authority to make that decision. That's something that should come back to the Planning Commission or the broader community. So that's what that exercise is primarily all about. But I don't know if Ron or you or Joanne or anybody else want to.
No, I mean, we're going to start that process this month, and, hopefully we'll be able to finish it within the next couple months, so.
Okay.
While we're on this, yeah, I would just echo these two things for me have some urgency. The overlay districts especially have urgency. Having just come through mediation, this is a way we can address some issues that I could foresee in the future. So I'd like to see movement, especially on the Oceanside overlay district, very quickly. And in the use table, I couldn't emphasize more than Brad did or Mr. Mayor did. The sensitivity of this community is different from Charleston County. And so there's a lot of the use table issues that I know well, and Madeline knows well on the council, that we should take a look at those and make sure that they're being approved appropriately with the appropriate eyes on them. So please take a close look at the use table. That's going to be very important as well going forward.
Yeah, and one thing, hindsight, not necessarily 2020, but it was what it was at the time. You just take a look, for example, and this ship has sailed, the PUD for Freshfields Village has a much wider range of permitted uses, and I think most people, if you look at those issues now, would really be comfortable with that are by right. That's why in the context of the conversations with Andell West and Riverstone, they actually agreed to, in the PUD that was agreed to ultimately by the various community organizations, to whittle back some of the permitted uses that had otherwise been allowed in Freshfields Village. So, but. Pardon?
And those uses were whittled down.
Whittled down, but there, yes, yeah.
But it still probably needs whittled down more.
Anyway.
I think Joanne has her hand raised.
For over a year. I did request that it be on the agenda for next month. I had talked with Ron about it. He that said he agreed that it should be on the agenda. We just got our agenda. It's not on there. I don't know if it was an oversight, but I think we should add it and get moving on it.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's,
I would
at
agree.
the very minimum of the overlay districts, the beach overlay should be moving on as soon as possible. So thank you both for agreeing to do that.
Okay. John, I don't know if you want to give us some further thoughts on kind of the comprehensive rewrite of the ZLDR, kind of what your thoughts are, timing, whether that's something we really want to try to onboard this year, or whether, again, I think it's ultimately necessary because our zoning code was really just pulled over from Charleston County. It's dated, it's problematic in a number of respects. There's some issues about kind of, who's responsible for certain land development review, planning commission, planning director, et cetera, all that needs to be addressed. Some of that can be dealt with in a rifle shot fashion, which is suboptimal, but we can clean up some things as we've just talked about. Yes, ideally, we do need to take a fresh look, a comprehensive look at our ZLDR, but the timing of that, the process associated with that, and the staff and consulting resources that are necessary is the big question.
Yes, thank you. This has been on our planning objectives and priorities list as a need-to-do item. As Mayor stated, the overhaul of the zoning code is long due. Particularly, I think, for two reasons. Where we are now today in Kiwa's maturation is we approach more resiliency, but also from a redevelopment standpoint, we really need to adjust the code to respond to those two priorities, redevelopment and resiliency. But in its just general sense of the administrative component of the code, being able to modernize sections that respond to land use patterns and regulations that are more current to date. That includes the use table, looking at things that we envision that are required. As far as the timetable, would want to move this on this quickly, but the comprehensive plan is the chief principle right now. And so upon completion, or at least us getting that to the approvable state, is before we would want to launch bringing potential outside expertise to help with this particular process. The important piece for staff recommendation of bringing in outside help with this is not just from land use policy and zoning ordinance rewriting, but also making sure that this is consistent with sections of our municipal code as well as state statute that might have already evolved over time. And so bringing in an expert who will be able to have at least some legal implications or discussions as part of the zoning override will be also important. And so from an actual time point where we are in a comprehensive plan process, we anticipate hopefully between April to, I think, be in front of council, depending on a couple of how fast our planning commission gets through that review process, and then hopefully beginning in FY '26, looking at the zoning code overhaul. I think in between that time, there are definitely a few smaller things, particular items like the use table that we just mentioned that Planning Commission will be going through.
Invite other thoughts, but my guess one concern, John, is just kind of timing and overall workload and capacity issues. Clearly, the comprehensive plan is kind of job one right now to get that process finalized. I don't know what the time frame is associated with that, but it's not going to be next week. And then some of these other things that kind of high priority, I don't want to characterize them as rifle shot issues, but adjustments to our current code, particularly giving us additional tools to be appropriately managing growth to deal with the resiliency or other set of issues, is a very high near-term priority. And so there's going to be some time that's going to be taken up with that. I don't know if that kind of, maybe we plan for putting in something in the 25, 26 fiscal year budget, but do you think it's realistic to start that process? Because it's going to take a lot of time to draft an RFP appropriately.
So that's been beginning to be drafted since last year, so it needs to be tweaked because of I think, a few other, but we've started that process a year ago. It's just that we have not wanted to launch that process to get through the comp plan. So there are things that have already been advanced, particularly sections of the ordinance that we know we want to be able to amend. That process has started, but this goes back to the conversation of staffing resources. It's been, 3 years now? Finally now, I've used the term of more than a band of one, and having additional in-department staff, being with Charleston County, being able to rely on those in previous years, that resource has been scaled back over the last few years just because of the maturation of growing in-house. But really, I think there's opportunity for us to look at that, specifically when we think of how much time is spent on like GIS and resiliency and those types of elements that are down dedicated to staff. So I think that conversation can continue to be had.
And John, this is not really related to that, but, and again, it's a staffing, it's a staff information gathering, but resource drain. It increasingly occurs to me that it would be useful for the community to have a better handle than we do on all planned development activity around us. And again, you indicated that, for example, the next door plot, it's been in basically underway for the last year. I certainly didn't know about it. Not that I necessarily needed to, but caught kind of unawares that all this clear cutting is occurring, and there are hardwoods in there, but the hardwoods have been clear cut. Was that? I know you sent a note to the county, but kind of what is all around us? Who owns it? How's it zoned? And are there any site plans associated with any of these developments around?
Yeah, so when we're notified of significant developments that have been in the region, I'll alert that to you guys. The particular tree cutting that is occurring off of Resurrection Road, that you might have been aware of a Board of Zoning Appeals case that was done in 22, I think, or somewhere into 22 or beginning 23. That case was denied, and so at that time, most folks kind of fell off the radar and thinking that project would not move forward. It just that case actually went before mediation with the county, and so that, I'm going to use the words, the variance was reversed, for lack of better words. And so a new property owner had just required with those immediate plans, it's just gone through the subdivision process, which allows them to go through preliminary site development for that site. So it's been an ongoing thing regarding particular plans. We've engaged with the resort. They've been not necessarily forthcoming with showing actual site plans for their anticipated discussions of what will occur on the future development for adjacent to Oak Point, but we are aware that is in the works. The biggest thing that I think from a long-range planning standpoint that I would ask council to consider, and that we've already beginning this process, I've been engaging with Seabrook planning staff more directly. In 22, we presented to the Planning Commission particular overlay zoning district for the Q Island Parkway, and similarly for Betsy Harrison Parkway. Those needed political buy-in, and those at the time just did not have that political winds to that. I think that we're at a point now where we have some of that political capital to be able to expound on being able to secure that. This goes more to the conversation regarding the urban growth boundary and its criticalness to ensuring the character of the area. And so the 23, we passed, town council did the adoption of the resolution for the urban growth boundary, supporting that. We anticipate to fold that more formally into our comp plan. And with that, a formal IGA would be potentially entered in with the county. And I've requested now that further conversation be had with Seabrook to build them in. Administratively from their staff, they seem to be supportive of that, and they're essentially getting support
I thought they had either at their planning commission or council recently passed a resolution.
So not just generally, I'm talking about, I forwarded them a few, what I would say, actual bullet points that we could put into an actual IGA to see if there's traction there or any interest in specifically tangible or tactical items that I think both municipalities and communities could agree on. And then jointly, those two entities or collectively can approach the county as a greater strength. So I think there's opportunity to better, what I would say, prioritize how Betsy Carrison is treating. It's not a new subject matter. It's more so, I think, having the council be able to gauge externally with the stakeholders to gain that support.
Well, we can certainly work on the external engagement with other policymakers and decision makers, but I want to come back to some of the operational things, and particularly with regard to everything going on around here. Because your point about the fact that it was denied a BZA, but then they must have appealed to circuit court, entered into a mediation process. We could have intervened by right as the adjacent property owner in that mediation process, and we should have done so. But we didn't know about it. And that's why I think it's critically important that we know about, as much as we can, everything going on around our buffer areas.
Yeah.
So that's just going to kind of be a constant.
What I would say, attention to much more broadly of how, I guess it's more of a question of how much engaged in actual off-island, and I think we've had that conversation independent of, to understand where is that leverage point or how far that distance goes. Yeah.
Well, again, what I talked about yesterday is, I'm postulating a construct that our zone of direct interest is anything that impacts the health of our marshes and our watershed and our native wildlife corridors. So let's at least pay attention to anything that's happening in that regard. It also presents, if there are opportunities for conservation easements or acquisitions in partnership with the County Greenbelt Fund, with State Conservation Bank, with Low Country Land Trust, Kiowa Conservancy. We should be aware of those opportunities and try to figure out if we want to engage with them.
Yeah, so the question is, to be notified of those development projects, the question is, from a engagement standpoint, that level of bringing it to council, bringing it to independent, to the mayor, or that's what I would want to have, making sure that we address it. Do we broadly just share it with the community? That's the questions that I'm wanting to raise to make sure I understand direction-wise. How does that influence our task here?
So maybe I can help with this. Anything that you know of that's happening in Lower Johns Island, including Maybank, that you think we might have an interest in, forward it. I would encourage you to over-communicate and just send an email to the town council.
No, let me refresh. I get that point. What I'm asking, I think, in a different way is that, I'll just go, tradition has been sort of, I guess, a policy or at least a direction of where the town administration feels about engagement in that level. And so that's what I'm asking. And I think that's
kind of very clear from an administration standpoint.
Correct, yes.
I can only speak from the administration standpoint, whether fellow council members would agree to, take specific action in any particular matter. But what I'm saying is not just if you hear, but let's literally do kind of an inventory of the status of everything. I'm not sure go all the way up to Maybank, but maybe just at least to Edenvale.
And so part of that is just sharing exactly like the development maps that we do, but also engaging with the other stakeholders. And so when we do attend the Johns Island Task Force meetings, we engage and report back and forth. So that's part of what we do now.
Again, I want to find a point, but if we had known about the mediation that had been denied, and then it had been appealed to circuit court, and there was a mediation, I would have liked to have had the opportunity to bring to fellow council members whether or not we should, as a town, have intervened in that matter as an adjacent affected property owner, as an example.
So as an action for you, to the extent you know of anything, and you can err on the side of being conservative, going all the way Maybank, but at least within, let's say, a mile of this town center, if you know of anything, just shoot us an email. And let me make the other side of the point. The only way today I find out about this stuff is through the Johns Island newsletter that goes out. I would rather get it from you and it'd be more comprehensive in terms of what's happening, not the political side of it, but just this piece of property, this, what's happened here, got sold or whatever. Anything you know of, just forward us just a quick two-liner. This is happening here.
And I think it would help, like you said, I don't always understand the context when I see it in the Johns Island newsletter, but hearing it from John or the staff would help me understand why it's relevant to us.
And I don't need to reinvent the wheel. The Johns Island Advocate does a great job of summarizing all that information, and it might be just you see a particular one that references something in our zone of interest, and then a little bit of follow-up detail as to whether there's anything relevant. Yeah, okay. Okay. All right. Okay, the goals and objectives, development agreement, and plan development. So development agreement first, we've had some conversation about this. I mean, as you know, the resort has indicated an interest to pursue a new development agreement. At a very preliminary, very preliminary level, that process has commenced. We've retained outside counsel upon the recommendation of both our town attorney as well as our kind of outside real estate lawyer, both Mac McQuillan and Ross Appel, George Bullwinkle. There is an initial meeting, just at a very high level. And in fact, I think, Mark, you may be involved in that, so it may have already occurred? Yesterday, okay. So you have more information than I do because I haven't heard back. It was simply to, I think, have an initial sit down, to have our council hear from Trenton Walker and Mark about kind of what the resort's objectives were and kind of where the process that had led to the last development agreement and decisions made there. And again, not much more than that at this point in time until I get additional feedback, but that's literally the only thing that's transpired with regard to the proposed development agreement. We'll sit down as an administration, me and the staff and the lawyers, and try to figure out what are kind of some of the key issues. The starting point from the resort standpoint was to use the current language of the development agreement and make little modifications here and there if necessary. That's their preference. We'll figure out from our council whether that's the most appropriate course of action or whether it's to start with a blank sheet of paper. I don't know the answer to that. But from the council standpoint, at the end of the day, the issue is, and long before it gets to the council, it would first go to the planning commission. Although I would note that one of the things we need to look at in our development agreement ordinance, provision of our zoning code that deals with development agreements, is there's much less process for a development agreement than there is for planned development or almost anything else. And in fact, there's just one sentence in there that shall be reviewed by the Planning Commission. It doesn't actually, I don't believe, says reviewed and approved. I need to look at that. And so, but my view would be that the Planning Commission should, before it gets to the council, and if we have anything that a framework that we're able to work out from an administration standpoint with the developer, would first go to the Planning Commission, go through the full Planning Commission review process, public hearings and everything, and have a recommendation from the Planning Commission to ultimately the council, and the council goes through its process.
Required to go to the planning commission.
Well, but it literally is just a one sentence, which there's a lot less detail, procedural protections, guidelines and standards. If you look at the annexation provision, the plan development, they're multiple pages long. The development agreement portion of our code is 2 small pages, which is to me stunning in that the development agreement is the most impactful, the development agreements have been the most impactful agreements that we've had. The other issue I would note about development agreements that we would want to address is this, what I think is frankly ridiculous view taken by prior councils and prior council that development agreements can be fundamentally altered and amended simply by resolution of the council without going through a complete review process. Given the interpretation of prior councils and council is you would have to go through the full ordinance process for development agreement. And then 3 months later, you can completely rewrite it and not have a single public hearing about it, just have a resolution at council. And I don't think that's acceptable. So that's one of these little rifle shot issues that we may want to address.
How is that possible, given state law around development agreements?
So what the state law says is a development agreement has to be passed by ordinance. There is a provision in that same statute that provides for development agreements, State Local Development Agreement Act, that says major modification, references major modifications and need to be passed by the same method as the development agreement itself. However, there is a provision in that same act that says that the parties may mutually consent to an amendment to the development agreement. Now,
Okay, so we can't impose a change, we can mutually agree to a change.
we can certainly add whatever additional procedural protections we want. The point is that my view has been, as a matter of statutory construction, that parties can mutually agree to an amendment simply is an enabling provision, that you can amend the development agreement. It doesn't specify how you need to do so, but again, prior council and prior councils have simply said, well, the town can decide what constitutes mutual consent. If they just want to pass it by voice vote or resolution and not by ordinance change or not hold a public hearing, that's up to them. I don't think that's an appropriate characterization of the statute, but in any event, we can add more procedural protections if we want to do so. Yes, Joanne.
Says amendments can be made to the development agreement by mutual agreement of the parties.
Yeah.
So the planning commission by that has no input, and that's something we do need to change. And we sent
And we just, yes, the parties can agree to amend,
but
that doesn't mean that, that doesn't specify the process, and we want to specify the process for that.
And I have a very, very strong bias that needs to be institutionalized, because for one thing, I don't think all 5 of us is going to want to devote the time and attention that the planning commission should be devoting to this. That's where the expertise is. They are looking at the issues in a totally apolitical perspective and are coming up with really legitimate and strong recommendations. And that's, if I have a choice on where I'm spending my time, I would like to devote that responsibility to the Planning Commission. It's a lot of talented people with a lot of brain power.
I'm just simply going to say I agree. They're a great resource. They should be involved in the process. We need to expand on that process.
And that's one of those little rifle shot things. We can change that in the near term. Now, at the end of the day, that doesn't address substantively what the goals and objectives are of the development agreement. And so that's where, council can certainly share its perspectives now. We're a long way from, entering into a new development agreement.
Can I ask a question about the previous, though? When you say mutual agreement by both parties, and this is not a dig against John, but is the town the party? Is the planning director the party? Is the council the party?
It
doesn't say that.
The town is the signatory, but on something like that, it acts through the council.
Okay. Is that our interpretation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty consistent, and that's how that works. The town is the counterparty it was the counterparty to Kiowa Development Partners.
I'm just reflecting back on the ARDA with the Kiowa Partners, and,
Yeah.
you know, the planning director is the authority in that circumstance when we were bringing issues to council.
No. No, it was a contractual agreement unless the contract specifically provided.
I'm talking 2 years back for approval for site plans and things like that.
No, okay, that wasn't something that was in the development agreement itself. The development agreement covered a lot of the standards. The development agreement itself didn't specifically address site plan review. Site plan review is part of our zoning code, which provided for the planning director being the deciding authority on the site.
I'm nitpicking, but I want to make sure I understand when they say the parties, you know, the town's the party, who's acting on behalf of the party. I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yeah.
Not John.
So that something doesn't get signed somewhere.
No, I mean,
And then
with
we're like, oh,
regard
that's not
to
what we
any
meant.
change to the contract itself, the development agreement is a contract that requires council action.
Okay.
Now, again, what the form of council action is one of those things that needs to be addressed going forward. Again, the idea that you could completely rewrite a development agreement and literally bring it to council meeting, we've completely redrafted this, all in favor, aye, and that's basically, so, anyway.
Yeah.
But now the issue is kind of goals and objectives of a development agreement. I invite kind of any thoughts and perspectives on that. You know, the whole purpose of do you have can you just pull up the local development agreement act, the introductory paragraph?
Well, you can use it, I think we have it right here. Right here, or you want more?
Well, I thought it was a little bit more than this.
Than this one right
Well,
here.
I thought,
South
no.
Carolina Government Development Agreement Act.
Well, no, it was actually purpose and intent of the development agreement process encourages the developer to make a major capital facilities investment commitment based on comprehensive long-term planning and ensures the adequate provision of public facilities. Development encourages efficient use of resources and potentially reduces the economic cost of development. I thought there was another sentence or two in the state statute. But the whole idea is it's supposed to be a mutually beneficial agreement. The developer gets to lock in the zoning standards for a long period of time. That's negotiable with the amount of acreage that would be covered by this, or even was covered by the partners development agreement. The statute provides for a maximum of 10 years. So as we learned as a council, I'm sorry.
That was referenced in the section that
You talking about the zoning ordinance? Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole idea is public benefit. But I chafed at the bit because we were constrained by a decision that a prior council had made back in 2013, as well as amendments thereto. Didn't matter how much conditions had changed. Bottom line is the developer got to take advantage of those standards and the language of the agreement that had originally been entered into. And the Development Agreement Act, by the way, is perhaps the only real instance in which the state has said future councils can be bound. A current council can bind future councils. Generally, in Congress or anywhere else, you can't restrict the legislative authority or responsibility of the next council, of a previous council. This is an exception to that. So if we entered into a development agreement, say, covering 10 years, we've bound future councils because they can't adjust that to respond to whatever circumstance. Now, the developer will say, and the reason for that is, we're not going to make investments, capital investments, and sometimes bring in private capital where public capital resources would not necessarily be available unless we have that certainty and clarity and that the rules of the road aren't going to change, the rug being pulled out from us. Makes perfect sense. And the municipality says, fine, that's of benefit to you, then what are the benefits for the municipality? That's supposed to be what the dynamic is all about. So, clear reason for developers to want this. It's in their economic interest to do so, and they might not otherwise make capital investment. my view is, and we should have a conversation about, okay, what's the corresponding benefit to the community that we are comfortable as a body agreeing to, recognizing that for however long the length of agreement is, we're binding future councils. Yes.
Two things. Approaching it from a Kika's perspective,
Ray, can you use a microphone, please? Maybe use Lance's.
From Kika's perspective, one is to make sure that it's spelled out that Kika is a third-party beneficiary of it. I know that was, I think we all agreed that they were, but there's been some argument. The second thing is I would talk to Kika about potential projects that maybe need to be done that could be subject to the development agreement. In particular, there's a planned roundabout at Kiowa Beach Drive, and that may be something that could be discussed in the development agreement. How it gets resolved, I don't know, but just something that should be discussed.
Do you have anything else like that, Brad?
Well, that's a big ticket item. That's probably going to be north of $1 million. The good news is Kika has the land and can do it, but it just needs to be, the funding will need to be worked out. I'm trying to think of other things.
Amenities.
Amenities, whether the resort would be willing to assist in amenities, I don't know. That's a more difficult question. I don't know whether that, but this is more just kind of fundamental infrastructure type things, what I was thinking about, and that's one that jumps off the top of my head.
Well, the Development Agreement Act language specifically addresses the need to provide for sufficient infrastructure in the context of any planned capital investment and,
Right.
and et cetera. And there's no question, I mean, the roundabout is exactly one of those kinds of issues that you would want to have some clarity around or be addressed in the context of a development agreement. And I think based upon prior conversations of which I'm aware, meetings I've attended, as well as brief conversations I've had with the resort, I think there's a general awareness and recognition that something would need to be done. It's already a challenging intersection.
Right.
And if you build a large new facility there, and plus you have additional traffic coming in through that area, ultimately from Ocean Pines, now, and now you have full build out of the Cape, that's just going to be one of those fail points.
Yeah,
The question is who's responsible for what is.
Right, I mean, Kimberly Horn's already done an initial analysis of that, and particularly on the left turn coming out of Kiowa Beach Drive, that's a fail, and we can see that it's a fail, because it's a pretty dangerous.
It already is a fail.
Yeah, it is a fail now. So saying it's a fail is not a big leap. But anyway, that's something that I think that hopefully there should be a discussion of, and to your point, Madeline, I don't know of all the things, but I do think it's a good discussion to have, and to make sure that you have a laundry list of whatever the things out there, whether you get them or not, I don't know, but it's obviously going to be a negotiation, but at least have some idea what is out there.
Yeah, there are a range of issues. You noted amenities. I mean, and I'm not telling you tales out of school, just referencing back to Mr. Warren's State of the Resort presentation. They clearly have some ideas or plans that they would want to move forward on in West Beach. But Mark, or correct me if I'm wrong, appears to be nothing at this juncture with regard to East Beach. Maybe you're aware of specific plans with regard to East Beach. I don't know.
I know that there are studies underway, principally out of Richmond, as it relates to as it relates to East Beach, but West Beach is the more focused point.
Yeah.
And we've witnessed three major changes in West Beach under the existing development agreement: the new clubhouse, the Villa Rona Check-in, Conference Center. Those would be examples of execution of the development agreement. We're all awaiting for the last piece in West Beach.
Well, and even there's one of the things we've got to be mindful of, and I understand that resort would like some flexibility. I appreciate that. The question is, what does that really involve and entail? We might have clarity, some clarity and certainty about what they want to do at West Beach, and that would be baked into the development agreement. They might not have that kind of certainty or clarity with regard to East Beach at the time you want to execute a development agreement. Then how do you solve for that? And that's a little bit more challenging because you'd like to know what's being planned. So I think there are ways to address those issues, and John's, you've talked about some of those ways as well, to kind of put in some parameters and allow something within parameters without necessarily having to spell out specifically what's embedded in that. But there's the other things of kind of the public benefit. Again, one of the things that we all understand is there's not much undeveloped land on the island itself that can be utilized for much of anything. And the principal landowner that has undeveloped land is the resort. And that certainly includes not just West Beach, but East Beach, and then some areas adjacent to the old East Beach Conference Center, but also adjacent to the sanctuary. And so whether, part of any mutually beneficial agreement, and I truly believe that there is the opportunity for a mutually beneficial development agreement that might include solving for things that are not necessarily the town-specific purview or responsibility, but, amenities for the residents or that KICO would own. One of the things we've talked about before is emergency beach access or cell towers, things like that. Maybe that can be part of the overall construct of a development agreement. But with that, I'll open it up and invite any other thoughts.
To basically redo, then you don't really necessarily have to have a full plan for East Beach at this point anyhow. Because if they developed a plan 3 years from now, then you could do an amendment and go through the process again.
Well, that's only if they were amending the agreement. I think, if I were the resort, I'm careful about trying to put myself in Roger Warren's shoes or Richmond's shoes, I would like to be able to say, we haven't decided on, what we're going to do on East Beach, but we just want to kind of embed in here's the range of things we would potentially want to be able to do, and kind of trust us with regard to how that all develops out. And therefore, we don't need any future amendment to the development agreement because we would have those rights under the existing development agreement. And that's kind of where I think a little bit of the tension's going to be if there's a desire to execute a development agreement in the relatively near future, if the Richmond's plans haven't crystallized on some of this stuff. And so, but this is just part of the conversation and the discussion process that we've got to go through.
We also have the option of having multiple development agreements, one on East Beach and one on West Beach, or PUDs, or there's several ways where the developer, the resort, or Richmond, as you say, can be comfortable, and we can be comfortable. And we can also take the long view and have one holistic development agreement that covers all their properties. And they take some understanding that here are the rules going forward. I think the thing that, for me, the most important thing is, as we think about this, I think we've learned a lot of lessons over the past couple of years, that as we think about a development agreement, we really have to have a 5 to 10 year view, not a 2-year view, or not this project view. So think about, they may have changes in their buyer base, and they have to anticipate that. We're going to have think about those same kind of changes in their buyer base and what they might want to have or might want to ask from us in the future, and provide either flexibility or restrictions in the development agreement. So it's again another strategic issue we have to think about with a long lens, not a short lens.
I think we need to think about from both parties' perspective that it'll be a different council in 10 years. And while the resort's been a great partner, Roger and the others, that could change. They could sell. There's lots of things that can happen in the business world, and the party we're dealing with when it actually comes into play could not be the party we're working with right now.
Actually, that's a really good point, because you are likely to have 2 transitions in the next 10 years. both with Roger and at Richmond. So it's a really good point to keep in mind.
Well, but you, look, you mentioned a good point as well, I think we should all be mindful of. There is, by its terms, the current development agreement would expire 3 years from now, I believe 2027. And the resort is interested in pursuing a new development agreement now because I think they're looking out towards, longer-term planning, but obviously the PGA and getting some clarity around some issues. So they have an interest in pursuing a new development agreement, and my belief is that there is the opportunity for, like I said, a mutually beneficial one. End of the day, maybe the parties can't have a meeting of the minds on that, planning commission, council, et cetera. Then what? Well, still have 3 years under the current development, or 2 years. They have the rights associated with the current development agreement. They could develop by the rights under the development agreement. Development agreement expires, there's not a new one. They have their base zoning development rights that would no longer be the development agreement, but whatever the base zoning is in the code for that. Or there's always the option of doing it in a piecemeal approach and just coming, like you said, with a PUD, for example, to West Beach first, and then later on one for East Beach if the base zoning or the terms of the existing development agreement didn't get them everything that they wanted to have. So, there's a fair amount of optionality now, and just this, again, this process is in the very, very early stages.
Very early.
Yes, more.
2 points. I don't know that I actually need a microphone.
It was just one people
One is you could also shorten the time and make it like a 5-year development agreement. And under the state statute, my recollection is it can be no more than 10 years. And so you could always do it that way, thinking about the transition issues or potential issues. I actually think the development agreement expired under the 10-year rule, but I'm not going to fight that with you today. I think they don't have one now.
What I said is by the terms of the current development agreement, it expires in 2027.
So you were being a lawyer, and I appreciate that, but I think it's expired under the state statute already.
Does the 2031 PGA affect the timing of and sequencing of things?
Well, I can't, based on kind of high-level conversation, Mark might have a
Hypothetical
thought. I
class,
think, back up a little bit, there had been plans for development of West Beach prior to the last PGA. And there had been an intent and desire to actually develop a hotel property there in advance of the last PGA.
Time for the PGA.
Yes, for various reasons, that did not happen, and that kind of relieved the pressure. The one thing we do know is the Goodwin family, Riverstone, has, of the long view on issues. They're not a private equity firm. They don't have to generate a specific return for the benefit of investors. And they, noted that fact, and that is a true fact. But I think now the conversation is come back up again in the context, same kind of thing as where you were before, PGA coming again. If we are to build a new hotel property, whatever, on West Beach, before the next PGA, that process needs to get underway in the relatively near future.
And you said private equity, that could be a future owner we're dealing with during construction.
Well,
We need to keep that in
that's always
mind.
possible. There's going to be a transition in the family in Richmond, whether that ends up being just a transition in kind of goals and objectives process, or it ends up in a transition in ownership, we don't know, and that's outside our control.
We just need to anticipate the potential of it.
But one of the things we also need to keep in mind in terms of kind of what's in the development agreement, this conversation I've had with Mr. Warren, is having some certainty on what it is they intend to develop is critically important. And like on West Beach, if you know it's going to be a 120-room hotel, or maybe with a lodge and some additional cottages, but 120 rooms, you can easily map out kind of what the infrastructure load is going to be. You know, you're going to operate at mostly full capacity, so you know you have kind of 240 people and staff going back and forth every day associated with that, and you can kind of map that out. If you were build 200 three-bedroom condos there, and you know you have those were short-term rentals where you could get 2 or 3 families in there, that's a much greater potential demand on amenities and infrastructure than would be the hotel, for example. So we've just got to, evaluate those kinds of things as we go through this process.
Toilet flushes, all that stuff.
Mark or Amanda, I don't know. Oh, Amanda, this isn't yours, but Mark, I don't know if you want to offer any other thoughts or perspectives on this.
So a development agreement is essentially like contract zoning, to be honest.
It is. It's
contract zoning.
Yeah, it is, yeah. So it's just like a PUD is in some respects.
Yeah, and a planned development is too, although a planned development tends to show more specific site plan organization, expression of architecture, and so forth, whereas a development agreement establishes specific development standards, and in this circumstance, by parcel. So it varies from one parcel to another. By way of example, the room per acre for East Beach on a hotel there is different than in West Beach. I mean, there are particular nuances that allow for the contract zone. The ability to focus then on proper planning attributed to those set standards that everyone agrees to, they can focus on those within the time frame then. As I said before, the existing development agreement yielded 3 building types in West Beach as an example of that. It yielded 4 cottages on the ocean course as an example of that. They met certain standards that were unique to each of those sites that hopefully we now live with in a positive way. The Sanctuary Hotel was actually the first of a series of development agreements quite a few years ago. So we have good history, is my point, even though, if I'm correct on the 5 councilmen right here and now, each of you haven't participated in development agreement discussions in the past. You're fully aware of development standards, the evidence of performance under the other ones that you can draw from. That is an excellent way for you to collaborate on the creation of a development agreement going forward. The intent of the resort on the approach that they're taking right now is to change it. This is their intent I'm representing. Their intent is to change as little content as possible, but adjust clarity. There's language clarity on certain things. There were certain things that were accomplished that don't apply anymore. By way of example, there's a reference in the existing development agreement to relocate the villa rental check-in. If you remember, it used to be at East Beach. Well, that's been relocated. That should be eliminated on the development agreement. There are a couple of things like that. So I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I think there's a lot of good history that all of us can draw from, as well as reflection on what the near future should be, which, we've learned some things about the near future that should be accounted for.
And I thank you, Mark, and I do appreciate, it has been conveyed, that is the resort's intent or desire, is that you make relatively modest changes to the existing development agreement or that framework, and saying, here's what we've done in the past, and we'd like to just kind of continue that process. And what I've indicated is appreciate that is the desire. Whether or not that approach necessarily makes the best sense going forward is something we just need to evaluate. And An example is for an example would be what was raised by Brad McIlvain, which is there is nothing in the development agreement that deals with, you know, infrastructure needs in the West Beach area, including a roundabout. Ultimately, is that something, the type of thing that needs to be reflected in any new development agreement? My own personal view is probably yes. Now, exactly what that means in terms of whose responsibility for what and the economics associated with that is one of those things you just got to flesh out over time. But conceptually, I think if you're going to build and put additional build on West Beach area, given what we know now and changed conditions with regard to the Cape, Ocean Pines, and everything else, what we see at that intersection every day, that needs to be addressed.
Yep.
As an example. Anything else on that?
Madeline, you're scowling. What are you thinking?
I'm not scowling at all. I think probably for 15 years, I've watched Roger's State of the Resort presentations at Our World, and he skipped a
He
year.
draws a lot bigger than I do, that's for sure.
He's something else. And one of the things that I have always been impressed with the resort is that there has been the desire and the ability to make adjustments. So I've watched different plans for West Beach, for instance, over the last 15 years be presented, and with things that happened with the economy, especially, or with COVID, the resort has made those adjustments. And you go back and you think about the straw market, and you think about the old East Beach Conference Center and the check-in there, and as much as you think I'm going to miss these things, and I remember the community's outrage over the sanctuary, and yet now it is a pivotal part of our geography and our life here. So I've always been impressed with the resort's kind of conservative approach to evaluating the needs of the community and the financial benefits that the resort needs to accrue. I think the issue is not what the resort has done, because it's done great work, and I think everybody agrees it's been a great neighbor. I think that the concern is that we all know that leadership will be changing, and we want to make the best possible plans to protect the community and also to recognize the financial needs of the resort. We just want to make sure that the correct pieces are in place so that both of those ends are met. That's it. Not a scowl, just an observation. I hope the partnership is as healthy and as mutually beneficial going forward as it has been over the last 20 years that I've been watching.
Well said.
I know that's your thinking face, not your scowling face.
Do we need to, the traffic community resource impact, we talked a little bit about the stuff within the town limits we're kind of addressing right now. Is there anything else we want to specifically talk about outside the town's limits? I mean, what we do know is we're at the whim and caprice a little bit of the county council. We've provided our input on things like the Main Road Corridor C project. I don't know if you all were reading Iowa, but the nightmares that occurred on our roadways yesterday after Stono River Bridge completely shut down, and there was an incident on River Road. A couple emails, I think was it your mother?
My mother.
It took 4 hours to transit. Somebody else said 5 hours to
Only takes
transit.
20 minutes.
Yeah, it shows how vulnerable we are. But there's not going to be any 526. There's no money in the county's budget for anything more than the main road the main road corridor projects A, B. In fact, they've skipped B, just A, the flyover, C, which we still don't know exactly what the staff's going to come out with, but it's going to be less than what the staff had, almost certainly going to be less than what the staff had previously recommended. So no money, no changes on River Road, no changes on Bohicket. It's just going to continue to be what it is. Now, one thing I would note that surprised me, So John, I think you're going to be meeting with, you and Daniel may be meeting with Andrew Turek, an engineer who, council member, no, not,
What's his name?
yeah, Jim McBride, I'm sorry, had hooked up with him somehow, and he was using publicly available Google Analytics to look at, and I should have actually, we should have provided that data. My bad on that. We can do that at a future council meeting. You can look at time series and see what the added time is to drive certain segments of road at different times of day and then or different periods of the year. And they were particularly doing that focused along Maybank and getting on and off island along Maybank, and they were particularly concerned about when the new school comes online. But he also ran it all the way down from 17, not every segment, down to Freshfields Village. And you could actually show where the backups were at certain times of day, the average backup relative to, you know, rush hour, evening rush hour versus middle of the day. The one thing that was surprising to me is, especially coming on to the island, notwithstanding if you leave early in the morning, you see the constant stream of traffic, there is actually not much of a delay relative to norm at peak times, at least in the morning, getting down to Freshfields Village from 17 or coming off of Maybank. There is, you do see, and kind of adds up, going off island in the evening, where you can see both before, it actually, so it's great to see the data, visually see the data, where going, you know, basically from plow ground to Maybank, and then particularly once you get to the river, before the River Road section from Old Pond, and maybe backing you much further than that, and a little again up at 17. So that's where, you know, what may be typically about a 35-minute is increasingly consistently about an hour.
And you've
Do
got
you
the
know
school
if they're
there.
doing that analysis during school? Because the
No,
timing
they
is
did. They
different
actually,
during
what they
school
were
versus
looking at
non.
was summer versus right
yeah.
post-school to
Yeah,
see the
sense.
changes. And there were some changes, and again, and this was focused on Upper River and Maybank more than anything else. But there were market changes in some areas, and others, school year or summer, it didn't make that much difference, particularly getting off of 17 down onto Main Road. But I introduced, connected John and his staff with this gentleman who's going to, I guess, show us kind of the tools, and I've actually got a presentation from him that just shows what he presented to the Johns Island Council, and I think that had been previously provided to the Charleston Council, and just my bad, I forgot to do that, and I intended to do so. But it's interesting data, and it's a tool set that, again, publicly available data, and I think we'll learn how, our staff will learn how to easily access and compile this information that we can use going forward to better inform our decision-making.
It's, you know, I think we've talked about this in other meetings, but, you know, you think about traffic impacts and development impacts. The one thing that has drawn my attention, and the Health and Wellness Village is a great example of speculative development where they're taking higher risk and wanting to upzone. And that brings the infrastructure and other concerns as well. And I know we've taken a strong stance and advocacy within the community to try to influence the county council to not support those kinds of things. But that's one area I think of vigilance. It seems like pickings are ripe in this area, and there's a lot of people out there with money throwing it down, thinking they're going to coerce an upzoning. And I think that's a real danger to our community, especially without the infrastructure. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, I've seen massive growth in other places I've lived, and it's a slippery slope. You build more infrastructure, you get more development. And so you build capacity, and it'll get used. And so where's that sweet spot? I don't know where that is for here. I do have a question. For on-island, this is subjective, but it seems that there's been a significant uptick in the last 5 years or so, especially since COVID, of more full-time permanent residents. There's still 20% that can be developed. There's the resorts project. There's other things going on. as we're looking at 5 and 10 years from now, have we really done a scientific survey, or should we, of the community? And really just like, like not Survey Monkey, like somebody who really does it for a living, and ask them, what are your intentions 5 years from now? What are your intentions 10 years from now? Are you going to be renting your place? Are you going to be full-time? I think that there's some more granularity we could get through some professional assessment. I don't know if that's something we should consider or not, but I think it might be helpful.
Well, one of the things that I had expressed some hope there would be a little bit more of in the comprehensive plan was some of this kind of data analytics. We actually talked about this at, I think, our last strategic planning meeting a year ago, and we probably haven't advanced the ball as far as we should. Most of it's been more back of the envelope stuff. We know the growth in the permanent population, the full-time resident population. What we don't know is but just some anecdotal information that of the part-time owners, I think Kika has some data that kind of cuts to this both in the survey as well as coming through the gates, that the part-time owner population is spending relatively more time here than they used to do so in the past, and whether that's going to continue or more people are going to shift to permanent residence. What we do know is about more than a third of all dwelling units are in the short-term rental program. We haven't talked about it, wasn't on this agenda. Is that something we want to address? Other communities have been addressing that. We actually have a much higher percentage of residents, surprisingly enough, of dwelling units under short-term rental licenses than many other communities do. A lot of other communities have caps like at 20%. We're at 35% now. We really don't have a cap. We have a cap only in certain neighborhoods, no caps whatsoever in the multifamily areas.
And Brad, is there an opportunity to do something with that cap, to adjust it at this point in time?
Well, we can do whatever we want to. You could say 35% now, but it's actually just 25%. So everybody's grandfathered, and whoever kind of loses a license, it falls away, and all of a sudden you get down. Or you could simply put a moratorium on issuance of new short-term rental licenses. There's a lot of different things you could potentially do. But what we do know is that there is a lot more load as a result of short-term rentals, because typically that's not just a couple coming in like a full-time resident in a dwelling unit. That's a family or multiple families in short-term rentals, and that's constantly turning over, particularly
We probably should take a look at that.
at peak season.
I would agree that we should probably take
Yeah,
a look at
I
that.
know that's what you're suggesting.
And that's why the conversation I was having with Mr. Warren, and I said, that's kind of the thing that it matters a lot if you're building on West Beach, if you're building a 120-room hotel, or because the plans have evolved. I think I'm going to do 2 or 3 times. They were originally going to do a hotel, then they thought about some type of villa complex, and now I think back to a hotel. But the traffic, congestion, amenities, infrastructure impacts are very different from a large number of short-term rentals relative to a hotel, and we need to understand all of that.
And I do agree with Madeline, we should look at that. I would say that any data somebody thinks they have probably isn't accurate anymore. I mean, my intentions have changed from when I bought to now, and I've never been surveyed by anybody. So I don't know that
Well,
we would
Kika has done, there's at least something in Kika. Do you recall what's in Kika's survey? Because they capture some of that.
Really capture what Lance is looking for. It's sort of like a forward-looking thing about what are your plans in the future?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's more like how much time are you spending at your property, and you can track it from the prior year, but yeah.
Snapshot of today, are you permanent? How much time do you spend? 6 months, 2 months, whatever. But it's not, what do you expect to do next year, 5 years from now, or whatever.
And I think about island-driven development, Orange Hill, the project next to Oak Point, other things that are being driven. Understanding, like, I went to the club's town hall a few months ago, the complaints about amenity and tea times that's going to be fixed with Orange Hill, but the consequence of that is a lot more traffic going up and down Key Island Parkway and Betsy Harrison and stuff like that. There's a gate issue for Kika to consider, but as amenities move off island and as we start distributing people who have different kinds of statuses, club members, Kika, whatever, more distributed out, we're going to see a lot more traffic. And I don't know that we've really taken a thorough look at what that really means. And if we're getting ready to do some capital projects, pedestrian access like you talked about yesterday, how far does that extend? I think there's a lot more in flux than we're maybe.
Well,
considering.
and sometimes what engineers come up with doesn't necessarily turn out to be correct. I mean, what point in time did Kimberly Horn do the study that basically said the Freshfields Village roundabout is going to fail soon? and it really hasn't. I don't think it's really come close to failing. However, what if, to your point about what if, Andell West, as it was, the PUD was approved, was just commercial. That's going to have its own pressure. But ultimately, there is the entitlement. And it gets back to the point of what happens with the Riverstone and Goodwin family interest going forward with the entire, 400 or 500 acres around Freshfields Mark, and that's all zoned right now R4. And there's probably even allowed density bonuses in there. And what the things that Seabrook Island Utility Commission, who's contractually obligated to serve that, said we need the capacity for potentially 2,000 single-family dwelling units around Freshfields Village. Now, if it's the Goodwin family still owning and controlling, do I think that's realistic? No, and in fact, they need to reserve 100 acres or so of parking for the next PGA, and I suspect there's a continued interest in getting future major championships to the Ocean Course, so I'd still want to reserve some of that. They have low acquisition costs relative to new buyers of land around here, so not the same types of economic pressures, but who knows down the road.
But like you said, what if? But I just think we need something that's more scientific, more data-driven, that looks at possible 5 and 10 year points that surveying people.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I will address this question to Joanne. I think why we didn't think about throwing that kind of a survey out there 2 years ago is,
We did ask, so we did try to get that in there.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. But would there be value now to the kind of scientific and comprehensive survey that Lance is suggesting?
Just one thing I would note is, Lance, I think I think I had asked to have you send, or I sent you, maybe not, the Kimley Horn traffic study that was.
Yeah, I sent you
The one thing, I mean, in terms of, they did a capacity analysis. They looked at traffic impacts at various intersections and on roads, given kind of what they assumed was a full build-out scenario along Beach Walker, on Island, as well as around Andell.
I'm not just talking traffic, though.
Yeah,
I understand.
I'm talking really about the intentions of property owners. I think you're right. We did try to get some more data on that, but we didn't. So would there be value now?
I think we're making investment decisions now, so, I mean, that's my opinion.
I should have asked Ron as well.
Oh, bye, Ron.
Well, that's also something we just need to do in collaboration with Kika, because they have
I agree with that.
information. One of the things I've had a conversation with Shannon about, and also Dwight Williams, and Brad, I don't know if you recall kind of where the status of this was, but the part of the issue is the lack, they know who's coming through the gate, they know how many cars are coming through the gate, but there's a technological capability to have a lot more granularity, to know whether it's a full-time resident, whether it's a part-time owner, whether it's an employee, whether it's a contractor, et cetera. You know, you have a code built in there, you should have the data to be able to capture exactly what the demands are through the gate.
I'm very familiar with that, but past doesn't foretell future, especially in this situation. You know, what are we modeling that against? What are our assumptions? I mean, I don't think that.
Well, but you start, I mean, some things you can figure out. You do know that the full-time, you know, there's approximately 500.
It's historical.
Dwelling units to be built out. John, is that the number, about 400 or 500 yet to be built, undeveloped? What's that?
Single-family residential?
Yeah. 360. So after that, you know there's no more of the construction traffic associated, all the trades associated with a full-time build. There's going to start being redevelopment, but you can track that. So
What I'm getting at, though, is on my little street, there's 9 more full-time residents than there were last year, and most of us weren't planning on being full-time residents. So how are we taking that into account?
Same on Seamarsh.
And, you know, because they had all these, the consultants had done projections based on who had lived there.
They had done projections, but it didn't take into account, you know, it's like, okay, it's an aging population, and X years from now, the average age is going to go from 70 to 75 or whatever, not taking into account that lifespans are getting longer, people are healthier, and that there's still the trend that when people hit a certain age, they're going to go to Bishop Gadsden, they're going to go to Seafields, they're going to go to wherever their kids are. So can we get at that scientifically of what, you know, people's plans are? So it's something to think about, and let me think about it from a market research perspective, you know, because what sort of people are going to answer. You know, we have a lot of trouble getting the part-timers to participate in some of these surveys, and that's where a big source of the permanent residence comes from. People tend to buy a villa, they're, you know, in their 40s or 50s, they're working, they come here for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden they think, okay, I'm going to retire, and then they buy a house or come more full-time in their villa or cottage.
Well, and you remember our discussion at the Planning Commission when I brought some of this up
Yeah.
a couple months ago, and the question was, what do you think the trend's going to be for the age of Keogh residents? I think it's going to be younger. That's what I'm seeing. Because people are realizing they could be full-time. Even though with return to office, a lot of people can work remotely. And the idea of working remotely and being a full-time resident someplace like this is appealing.
It's a good point.
well, and interesting enough, there was a data point, and we had a conversation about that specific data point. That the text, the language of the current comprehensive plan says this assumes that as we continue, there's going to be, the population is going to be aging, and it's kind of it seemed to me a static assessment of what the age is now, and people are just getting older rather than kind of the changing
think they're
dynamic,
moving here younger.
particularly of maybe part-time owners who do have the opportunity because they can work remotely or otherwise to start moving their families here earlier. So I was questioning that one particular data point myself.
So maybe as I think about this, the answer to your question is yes. We could probably use the data to see what's going to happen, you know, what's an island going to look like in 5 or 10 years. From our experience with the consultant, we didn't get a good answer. And I would admit, it's hard to get the data, right? Because the only way to really get it is to survey the people who are on island and to get a response. So using Kika is a better way than the mailing lists we have. So it's a really hard science, I think is part of the problem. And then after you get the data, it's how does it change based on lifestyle changes? So you said the population is getting younger. We did have enough data to show, I think it peaked out at 2,300 full-time families in like 22. And then it ticked down as people started going back to the office. So we may get some surprising data because, yeah, people do move off the island when they get to be 85, or more people are retiring earlier coming on, so the average age is dropping. I think it's worth trying. It's going to be I think it's going to be hard answer to get really good data based on our previous experience.
I understand what you're saying. I think a professional company that does this for a living probably knows how to handle that.
all
We
property
can't get
owners.
to everybody.
And Kika needs the data too.
Kika would and they might be willing to get it, but getting them to, they're having trouble just getting 50% to vote
Mark
to
Richard.
answer surveys.
Well, the important thing about survey work is you don't do singular. You do it in rhythms to see what the patterns are, because it's too easy to get a survey and come to the conclusion that
One and done.
we're getting younger and all. In fact, when you do it that way, you tend to deny your instinct about looking at what a singular one is all about. Because the tendency of it's getting younger, well, I mean, the buyer profile doesn't track that. The buyer profiles are all about the same age in terms of when their purchase is. Although we are increasing the number of permanent residents, it's not a significant change. And that makes sense in terms of the community type that we have. It's a particular type of community where the non-resident profile is going to generally be very similar over the decades.
What is that buyer age?
Pardon me?
What is the buyer age?
It's in the mid-40s. If you look at new buyers, it tends to be in the same, when I say mid-40s, it's not exactly 45, it's a range, but it doesn't materially change that much.
How long back does that go?
I'm sorry?
How long back? Is that 10 years worth of data or 20 years?
Well, I'm married to someone that probably, it goes back 40 years, 45 years.
Wow.
If you look at the profile, and it makes sense in terms of the optimal time period when people make money, in terms of, regardless of what the money source is, it's very similar.
It's a classic dynamic. They vacation, then finally they accumulate enough wealth to buy a second home.
Right.
And that's, and where they,
College-age kids, it gets a little younger, so you get more people in the 50s than the 60s. But it's never going to get real young because we don't have schools.
But I would reinforce the value of survey work appropriate. And make it consistent, so you do see patterns in certain categories.
Yeah, that was a great one.
but we should somehow just figure out, I think the best way to get, to do, I'm not sure when their next community survey is going out, but Kika reaches, whether they, I don't know what the response would be, but they reach every property owner. We do not. So Kika could adjust their surveys, and we could work with them to try to capture additional survey data.
I've never gotten a Kika survey.
They do, when was the last one?
They do a lot of attitudinal. Kika does a lot of stuff that evaluates attitudes.
Yeah, Stephanie's showing me, they did a comprehensive survey. The last one was a little less than 2 years ago. They have 9,000 members in Kika and email addresses for over 8,000, and 36% of people responded. But so I don't know, maybe we can ask Kika, I don't know what their plans are for.
We do it every 2 years, so it's coming up.
Okay,
I don't remember it.
okay,
Every 2 years.
okay.
On it. I know somebody to ask.
And then figure out what we do with it once we get the data. Can we task Stephanie with reaching out to Ms. White and doing that?
All right.
Thank you, Stephanie.
All right. We actually did come to our lunch time. We can just finish now. We were going to come back to open discussion. Do we have enough open discussion?
We've had a lot of
We've had open discussion. I would invite any final comments or thoughts or anything we didn't address, and if we can get through that, then we can just go ahead and adjourn.
Who's going to give Stephanie the questions to put on the Kika survey? You want to work with Stephanie to?
I'm not sure where, first let's just understand what their potential appetite is for doing this. And then I'm not writing survey questions. They can be very loaded. I don't know how, if you simply say, what are your plans for if you're a part-time owner, or for becoming a full-time owner or not, I just don't know, but, maybe.
Maybe turn that to planning.
Well, I guess if my sense is probably Leah would have some capability to do that if she was given some direction. She's pretty sharp.
Yeah, we did have, do you still have those? I have to go through my files too. Okay. I did purge.
You have someone, who's, I don't know who Leah is, if you have someone who's capable, happy to talk to her. I would think they'd be amenable. This all folds into the whole KIA concept of working together.
Anything else for the good of the order? Community members, any comments? Anyway?
They've been active.
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Wow, we actually did it ahead of schedule.
In our normal spot.
Well done, Brad. Who would have thought?